Really?
Oh, yeah.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah. She even designed a beware of owl type sign that they
When you
actually
folks are ready,
adopted.
we'll begin the meeting.
I'll have to check that out.
First item on the agenda is agenda review, and I'll turn the meeting over to Jeremy to give us a quick rundown.
Okay, so today we're going to get to review that long-awaited closed-circuit television, so the CCTV proposal. We're also going to be covering the stops data collection update. Captain Camcar will be here a little bit later to speak to us about that. Then there was some discussion in January regarding citizens filming officers. So there was a request at that time for to see some policies that might be out there. And so Sergeant Lowen has put together some of those policies, and he'll be discussing that with us a little bit. In addition, Mayor Piercy did make a recommendation as far as who the new police commissioner will be, and that goes before council on the 23rd, I believe it is.
You know better than me at this point.
So hopefully
That sounds right.
next month we'll have somebody to announce.
And who was that?
It'll be here.
Sorry, the Mayor Piercy said she would be pleased with either Mr. Landrum or Miss Height.
Raquel Heck.
Heck.
And she said Raquel Heck has experience with immigrant issues, so that would be her recommendation out of the two. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. The next part of our agenda is public comment. I see we have two people, so at this time I'll turn it over to our Vice Chair, Cameron Ball.
Thank you. First I have Carol Burke-Caldwell, and next I have Leah Pitcher. Welcome.
Thank you. Carol Burke-Caldwell, 2510 Augusta. I just have a quick couple of deep felt thank yous and kudoses, for there is much on your plates tonight. Big kudos to Sergeant Matt Lowen for the wonderful research and work that he did put into your packet materials tonight. There are many examples of policies at departments across the USA to aid you in your discussion tonight regarding a potential EPD policy to help guide officers who encounter civilians recording them. His cover letter and the sample model policy was just excellent, and those other policies to help you select best fit scenarios for Eugene, perhaps. Kudos to Chief Kearns for the leadership and balancing act that he does consistently, listening to community concerns and suggestions while also mindful of the real-life work that his officers face day in, day out. It is a balancing act to uphold constitutional rights that his officers swear to protect, and to balance all this with public safety protections for all, the public and police. His attentiveness in response to this issue is just one more example of how well he does lead his department and listens to community. Finally, it was wonderful to see several EPD folk, i.e. Chief Kearns, Assistant Chief Durr, Jeremy Cleversey, PIO Melinda McLaughlin, and likely others I might have missed in the crowd, at the January 28th community conversation on racial profiling and police misconduct hosted by NAACP, CALC, and Civil Liberties Defense Center. I noticed when the event ended and folks were trailing out, the Chief Kearns stayed and visited with several young people of color, and a middle-aged gentleman too, in the circle with Chief, and I heard him say, "My door is always open. If you would like to meet with me to share more, I will make it easier for you by offering to you name the time and the place." Somewhat paraphrased. Didn't record it, Chief. My perceptions after his comments and his invitation to these folks was real appreciation from them and a slight lessening of tension or angst, and I think I saw a little more trust. This wasn't an anomalous invite or outreach incident offered by Chief Kearns. I've attended many community events where I've seen the same spirit of listening coming from this chief, and no one can say this man has not tried to reach across divides, real or perceived. I only hope more in community will reach right back across the divide to Chief and others, because we're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is, our next speaker is Leah Pitcher. Hi, Leah.
Hi everyone.
Hey, Lee.
I'm Leah Pitcher. I'm the deputy police auditor. For those of you who don't know, I haven't been here all that much recently, so I'm back. I don't know that this is necessary. I know George is going to give a report on CRB this week, but I just wanted to talk to you all. I think there was some confusion about the meeting. The CRB did vote to have a subcommittee to look at their protocols. Right now, their criteria for cases to review is was very vague, which I think is not a bad thing necessarily. They're just having a committee to look at that criteria and see if it needs to be fleshed out, see if it would be beneficiary to even look at it further. So I'm here if you have any questions. I'll be here. I do have to leave a little early, so but if you have any questions about our office or what we do, definitely come talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment. I'll turn the time back over to Bob.
Thank you. And the next item on our agenda is commissioner comments and responses to, so this would be a good time if you had questions for Ms. Pittsburgh as she requested. So anybody want to go first?
I'll go first.
James.
Yeah. Normally the first one through the door gets the bullet, right? Okay. So.
And a good evening to you, too.
I'm going to take one for the team, James.
Yeah.
The best items on the buffet, I thought.
So, first off, I'd like to thank Carol for, her excellent report. I mean, I think that's a great thing, and it does something. I think a few years back, we conducted a survey to gauge community response to EPD, the officers and stuff. And I was wondering if Vice Chair Miller remembers the time limit that we said that we will review that and perhaps do it again. I think it might be a good thing because the leadership here has changed. I know that EPD has changed, the DNA and stuff, and there are a lot of good things that's going on. So how we gauge the community relationship, maybe they might find some value in that. And it's nice to see everyone.
Chief, I think we talked about that before.
I would just also thank Carol for her comments. I think it's really helpful and productive for this body to hear about what she's observing in terms of the chief's activities in the community, because we can't be everywhere all the time. And I also appreciate the perspective that she shared and acknowledging the chief's good work in terms of community outreach. And then in terms of the CRB, I don't have any specific questions, but I think I agree with Leah that the language around how the CRB chooses their cases is pretty wide open and not very specific. And maybe it doesn't need to be a lot more specific, but I think just looking at the process is a good thing for any body of that nature. And so I think that's great that you guys are considering that. You may not make any changes to it, but I think having that consideration is a good thing.
First of all, a question was asked last month whether the police CRB is recording, and I don't remember who asked it. No, there is no recording other than written notes. There is somebody taking notes. Real interesting, Sergeant Reynolds talked about what police fear the most. And this is one of the subjects I would rather stay ignorant at, and I was really, really shocked. What they fear the most is where somebody's hands are. We saw a video of it looked real casual, and policeman pulled a couple, actually 3 policemen involved. Policeman pulls a guy looking real casual. He has his hands in his pocket. Bam, bam, bam. He kills one police officer, injures another. And this has to do with the question, sometimes it's really difficult to say, hey, Joe, can I see your hands? Because, 99.8% of the people, or 99, I don't know, a high percentage are wonderful people. But, if you do 1 in 10,000 are bad, I suspect that would mean probably every day there's going to be, anyway, so how a policeman asks to see your hands sometimes, it's it could be done better, but it's so very important. And they saw a video on the hidden weapons, pink guns, cell phone guns. They had a super soaker, one of these plastic super soakers. Somebody put a shotgun in. This is stuff I didn't even know that went on. it all in risk management with police. And, you know, sometimes on a few percentages, they risk their lives. So that is a problem that they're aware of and they're working on, is how to get your hands exposed in a very quick motion. We were talking about, and by the way, and you probably know, I'm one who always looks, I'm a businessman, always looks after nickels and dimes. And what is the most effective way for all committees to run? And the police commission is looking at third-party complaints. That's people who are not there at the scene and do third-party complaints. And how should there be some kind of limit to just third-party complaints? And, you know, there's a problem of sometimes people are too shy, some minorities, some sexual orientation. I mean, it's a very, very sensitive area about third-party complaints, because there are some people that would never go in person and complain about it. But also, there needs to be some kind of, what would you say, some type of, I don't think we have gatekeepers in this community, but some kind of gatekeeping ability to make the precious resources of each and every department be most efficient, get the biggest bang for the buck. So that's where the Citizens Review Department is talking about gatekeeping, third-party complaints, and it has nothing to do. And one thing, there's been rumors going around that they won't be contacting minorities or da-da-da. Those are all untrue, so I need to really nick at that. That the NAACP and LULAC are still very much encouraged to do that. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at it. Yes, I am part of the committee. There are 2 other people who are going to be on the committee and report back to the police commission. And as always, I have an open door, cell phone calls, whatever I can, if you have ever any concerns of how we're doing our business as of this date. Thank you.
I want to thank Leah and Carol both for coming out tonight. Good to see Leah back again. Missed her. And Carol, it's always good to see you, and you always come with great information for us. I also want to thank Edward and the chief too, because he always puts in good information into our packets that Jeremy puts together for us. But I've been seeing a lot of Edward's information in there, especially recently, and I've been actually clicking on a lot of those links now, and especially since it's some of the topics that are right on target with what we're discussing. So I've been finding the information to be very, very valuable in there. Thank you. And other than that, I think I'll save everything for the end. But it's good to see everybody again.
Okay, so in regard to James's question about a community survey, I thought, and I could be recollecting incorrectly, that we had talked about that a few months ago, and that Chief, I thought you had stated that we were planning on doing another community survey in the upcoming year. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, we actually ran a survey last year, and we didn't have the analysis.
Okay.
And right now we have a volunteer who's a retiring philosophy professor who's looking at it to see what work we might be able to do with the raw data and everything.
Okay.
Thank you. Welcome tonight. Thank you all for coming out. It was a beautiful day out there today, so kind of hard to come back inside after that. But I just want to give you a heads up on a little something that came up in between our meetings, and that was I was contacted by the chair of the Human Rights Commission, and they are interested in getting us to collaborate with them on 2 issues. One deals with what he characterized it as housekeeping, because the state law already covers transgender people in with the intimidation laws. The way it was written was by sexual orientation, which does not necessarily cover that particular So they want to make it more encompassing and make the city code the same as to comply with the state law. So that was an easy call. The other thing they're interested in is including homeless people in the intimidation 2 laws, which would make it, a crime to, in some way, intimidate people because of their socioeconomic status. It's a little more difficult, and I'm aware of that. So it's not something we can just hop on and say yay or nay on. I think it's going to require discussion among the members. So what I have offered to do is to bring that up at our work plan session in May when we do our topics, and everybody will be able to suggest topics, and we'll put that in there in the mix, and we'll see if the interest is there to discuss it and to help them. They seem to be okay with that in a meeting we had, and so I think we'll have a good chance to take a good look at that later on. For those of you who know something about it, I know Edward knows, of course, and maybe I stole you with thunder, but when you're going to report on that, but you're welcome to elaborate. Really, I have nothing else, but again, I'm leaving tomorrow for a couple weeks to visit my family back east, so I'll see you when I get back. The rain and the wind and the snow will all cooperate.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. And I guess one thing that came up during Carol's comments was meetings. It would be really great if some of these things, like that meeting that you had attended, the NAACP thing that Carol had mentioned, if that could be sort of stuck in the weekly mailing that those things are coming up, stuff like that that might be useful for us to attend, a sort of a calendar thing. If that could happen, that'd be fabulous. Let's see, and I guess with the CRB, yeah, you reported that we're not recording at this point.
Of audio or video, but notes are being made.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm just wondering if it might be possible, because most of the time the notes are fine, but if the question of recording, those meetings could be brought up in the event that some of them may be of interest later on to observe. If resuming the recording could be brought up as a possibility, I think that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I want to make sure your question is, if there is meetings of interest the CRB is going through, is that?
Well, for example, we can go up to the website and watch any of the past meetings for this commission,
Okay.
which I've done from time to time.
Okay.
And it would be nice to be able to do the same thing with the CRB. And so I would like to suggest that those, meetings be recorded again. They used to be recorded,
Okay.
and then that practice was stopped.
Okay, I'll report back.
Okay, thank you. I did follow up a little bit more on those 3 cases that Carol brought up, which really, it was sort of 3 cases in a month that had to do with citizens recording the police. Had a rather lengthy discussion with Mark Kistner about that, and a couple more shorter discussions about it. But it really, I think, does point to the need for a policy, and I do want to commend Matt. Again, I told him personally when I came in on the quality of the work that you did putting this packet together. So I think that's a really good thing. So third-party complaints, and it's good that we're going to look at or consider in the future the homeless thing, and again, which is great. Thank you.
All right, a couple things. A question for the chief. And maybe this needs to be answered later or something sent out in a weekly packet. But when the University of Oregon Police Department was the Department of Public Safety, there were 2 memorandums of understanding with the city and with Eugene Police about how they would operate together, what citations UO, DPS could make. I'm wondering if the police department has any new memorandums of understanding or some kind of other contracts with UOPD at this point, or if the city does that touches both UOPD and EPD. And the reason I'm asking, one, I'm just curious how this whole thing's evolving with having 2 police departments in town. And the other is, I've talked to a couple of students now who got cited by Eugene Police Department officers off campus, and then ended up getting contacted by the dean of students at the school about whatever the conduct code violation was that happened off campus. That ostensibly, there would have been no way that UO would have known about it. So I'm curious where that's coming from, and just overall how the whole thing's evolving.
Yeah, I can answer that briefly if you like. I don't recall if we finalized it, but we've been working on an agreement on how we're going to share certain documents. For instance, we'll conduct criminal investigations that will be relevant to the university because of the students that live there, but otherwise are not relevant for law enforcement purposes on the university campus. So how do we share that kind of thing? It's an agreement we've been working on. And then the authorization of UOPD personnel to issue citations is an intergovernmental agreement that you're familiar with that needs to be updated. So it's time to do that.
Is it still the old one that they were using with DPS?
Yes.
Okay.
And then it's about time for us to contemplate some kind of understanding about where the U of O will do their policing and where the city of Eugene will do its policing. And we haven't started that conversation yet. And you have, I don't know how we notify the university that their students have engaged in criminal misconduct off campus, but we are notifying the university of that. They want to know about it because it's a violation of the student code, which now extends to off-campus behavior.
So I'd be curious about more information about that, like how it's happening, why it's happening. I mean, just because the UO wants to know, why does EPD have to acquiesce and give the information?
We asked them to, but I'll gather all the information about it. If you like, I can report back here, or you and I can just talk offline.
So if anyone else is interested in this, I think it's appropriate to talk about here.
I'd like to hear.
Yeah. Claire, you had something?
Well, I just might have, a lot of this transition and the change with the code of conduct is something that Councilor Zelinka knows a lot more about, but I do believe it's been an ongoing challenge for the city that there's a feeling that students aren't held accountable for activities off campus and that the code of conduct hadn't applied and that it was a piece of accountability that was missing. So I do think there's been an effort from the council to ask U of O and EPD to cooperate more around that. And I don't have a specific instance I can point to, but just from conversations I've heard around when we were discussing the unruly gatherings law, that was a real point of frustration for people, particularly in the neighborhood, that students could do all sorts of bad behavior and then it wouldn't affect their academic situation, and so they just keep doing it even though we might be levying fines against them. So I think it was actually a deliberate effort to create some nexus between off-campus activity and the students' code of conduct.
All right, well, I'd be very interested in learning more about it.
Can I ask a question about that? Well, I'm assuming that the records for the students are public records, so
Well,
it's not illegal for the department to share.
yeah, if you're, I mean, I don't know about getting a citation, but if you're arrested, that's a public record. But I don't know the details.
It sounds like
how that
we have
happens.
some interest on the commission, so see if you'll bring that information back to us, whatever we can find, we'll have it out on the next meeting.
What we can do is Lieutenant David Knapp has helped develop the whole social host ordinance program and work with neighborhoods in the University of Oregon, so he could probably come back with a report and just let us know how much time he'd like to spend on it.
Alrighty, so
So-
next is Edward. Oh, are you not finished? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask George or Leah about the third-party complaint and the review that you're doing right now regarding how the CRB chooses which cases to review. Is that separate from the third-party complaint issue?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two things going on. You're looking
Well,
at...
and that's, Leah, I could be incorrect on
If
that.
I
They
may-
know more.
Yeah.
So the subcommittee discussion arose out of the third-party complaint discussion. Right now, CRB protocols don't talk about third-party, second-party, origin of complaints whatsoever. The CRB protocols just say they may select a case for review based on the request of basically anybody or on the request of a CRB member. So there was a discussion on, okay, there was a request for a review of a third-party complaint from the third party, and I think that's where the discussion began, and it went to, let's look at the CRB protocols and see if we need to flesh these out a little bit more. So that's where the committee's going. The auditor protocols specifically talk about third-party complaints, but that's unrelated to CRB protocols.
So you're not
Does that make
considering...
sense?
So it's not being contemplated whether to allow people to make third-party complaints to the auditor anymore?
Absolutely not.
That's
That's not
absolutely
under,
not.
that's,
It's just-
that's always going to be okay.
Okay.
I mean, that's.
It's whether the
not on table
CRB is
take
going
that
to
off the table.
review them potentially.
Right.
Correct.
And the
Yes.
CRB is looking into that, or a committee of.
Correct.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
help?
Thanks for that
Okay.
clarification.
Thank you for bringing it up.
So it's like Friends of the Court complaints, that sort of.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Bob for making time in his busy schedule to come and meet with the head of the city's Office of Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement and with a couple of human rights commissioners, including myself, to talk about the possibility of a joint resolution between the two bodies to amend Intimidation 2. How that actually works beyond something symbolic, I don't know. I leave that to staff and to the heads of the commissions to work out, but I appreciate Bob's willingness to come and meet and hear the thinking about that. One slight correction, Bob, is that homelessness did not appear in the language there. It was socioeconomic status. And we both know that either one of those is going to be tricky to deal with in the field. Partly because it involves asking questions that people don't want to answer, perhaps shouldn't have to answer. So this is not going to be something easy to put into work in the field, but I think a start needs to be made in patching this hole in terms of intimidation of people that if they are not already protected classes, they are at least vulnerable classes. You're seeing me sitting here today due to a clerical error on the part of Human Rights Commission staff who forgot to put the renewal of all of the liaisons to everybody onto the January agenda. So that will be settled at the next HRC meeting, and so far, the sort of job evaluation I get from our chairman is, please tell me you're going to come back and do it for another year. So hopefully you'll continue to see me. And about the police department telling the dean of students of a college that this student did this out in the world. Yeah, I can see where that would bother some people, but I would also, I think, have to remember that student code of conduct is essentially their terms of service agreement, their contract with the school. And the school has a certain social contract and a paperwork contract in some regards with the community that surrounds it. So I'm absolutely not averse to there being accountability that the neighborhoods have in this issue. However, I'm also aware that this problem used to also work in reverse. And when I and a bunch of other kids in '69 went and did a little anti-war demonstration in the quad at campus, we all got suspended. And our dean of students actually wrote to our draft boards and told them we were no longer eligible for a 2S, and I got my orders to report for induction promptly. Yeah, so there are possibilities for abuses in this communication. I'd like to think what happened to me couldn't happen again. But I would like to be sure that there's not an element of personal animus in how these messages are carried, that they're carried the same way for everybody and not on the basis of that guy's a troublemaker. But I do think that communication is important to have. And I also think if we're going to discuss it here, we might want to invite some neighborhood leaders from around the campus. Because from their point of view, oh my God, we've already been through this for years, hammering this out. Please don't call it into question again. So I think we should think about that. That's all for me tonight.
Good evening, everybody. I apologize for being late tonight. And, I'm sad I did because I love the public comment section, and so I hate that I missed that tonight. The only thing I will say is I agree with Jesse. I think we do need to look at this communication between with the university to make sure of how it's done and because it's a little worrisome for me that students, what they do outside of the campus suddenly becomes a campus issue in some ways. So.
That's it? Okay, thank you, Bill. And now we're into the minutes approvals. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended from the last meeting. Remember, we carried them over to get corrections made because it was a rough draft. Okay, so now we have the final copy. You all have time to read it. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Approved by James, second.
Second.
By Jim. And Jim, any discussion on the minutes? Any corrections? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous.
I've got a quick request. I hope it isn't too much trouble. I wonder if the chief's presentation could be the last item before commission closing comments. So then Captain Ken Carr and Sergeant Bill Mullen can go.
We'll send them home early.
You don't want to make them sit through your...
Altruistic.
It's called financial responsibility.
Lectures, you know.
Can we get a consensus on that from the commission?
Just save the taxpayers money.
Yeah.
That's fine. We have a consensus there. We'll change the agenda to allow the chief to speak last. Okay. That was pretty easy. Next on.
We still have the second set of minutes.
Closed.
We still have the second.
I thought we did them as both.
We did them together.
Oh, we did them together? Okay.
That was streamlined.
Yeah, that, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless you found a mistake in one, we can go back and close. Next is the closed circuit TV proposal. So we are ready to hear.
Carl, you ready?
You just getting together. I saw him.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Didn't want to be presumptive and step up here.
You're always welcome. It's okay. Sit down, you lose half your audience.
Yeah, I know.
You're always welcome at our table, especially if you're by.
So do you want me to lead off into the proposal?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just going to turn it over to you to let you tell
Okay.
us what you're going to do here. That's fine.
All right, so there's two pieces of the proposal. One is a proposed policy, and the other one is a draft of a write-up for the pilot project itself. And kind of the discussion was about the concept of the CCTV and what we anticipated it to do. In short, what we want to do is have the CCTV be an enhancer to the law enforcement because we can't be everywhere at the same time, and we wanted to reduce crime and maybe capture evidence of a crime that occurs. So with that theory in place, we looked at where crime is happening throughout the city. We looked at it as large, and we looked at crimes over a 12-month period. We looked at the calendar year of last year. And that's where you see all the dots with the, you don't see the heat map on it, but it's a heat map that shows the density of crime. And then in analyzing that, we looked at it and said, what areas do we feel that could have an effect where we could deploy these cameras that would reduce crime, which there's heavy foot traffic and things like that. And that's how we came up with basically the Bermuda Triangle, which is that 8th Alley to 10th and Olive. So we looked at the pedestrian traffic that's there, we looked at the nighttime activities, so those cameras if deployed there would give us 24/7 types of capabilities where cameras deployed somewhere else might not give us that, so they wouldn't give us the best bang for the buck.
The other parts, in looking at the other areas, the crime is more widespread where we don't think they would be as effective in their deployment. Really, in doing this, I've talked to several camera companies and stuff. They would want to come down here and take a look at the environment to get an understanding of what the cameras would be deployed to give us a costing. So I held off on that because until everybody decided that was a good idea, I didn't want to move forward with that and give them false anticipation of what might be happening. So that's kind of how we got to the location where we thought it'd be most viable to deploy those cameras.
Thank you. Questions for Assistant Chief Darrell?
You just want questions right now?
Right
not-
now, questions.
not
We'll get
opinions?
into what we're going to do about it.
So I did have a question, and maybe, obviously, this is something that doesn't need to be figured out right this second, but it talks about choosing comparable locations that won't be under surveillance as, so that you can track your data sets. And what's the thought about how you would choose those locations, since these sites that you're identifying for surveillance are super hotspots?
Right.
And so I was wondering what your thinking was around that.
Yeah, and so on page 2 of the pilot project proposal, the first site is the West 8th Alley. That's the Bermuda Triangle that I proposed. The other 2 sites were also, and I just briefly synopsized the crime impact that's there, and there's more detail than the maps that are provided to you. But those are also the second heaviest crime areas. So we wanted to say we want to use those those 2 other locations as our sample sites.
Okay. I see that sentence now in your...
Yeah, no, that's okay. But, and just, the reason when we do a sample sites is because, if we are effective, we think we're effective by the camera deployments saying, hey, we dropped crime 20%, but in our sample sites, if they drop 30%, we might be saying, hey, well, maybe they didn't have an effect. So you always want those sample sites, and usually in projects like this, they only do 1, but I'd like to do 2 just because of dynamics, and we're already collecting that data there.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you.
I know any time that police in a bigger city do a sweep of something, in some cities, they're courteous enough to come down and tell neighborhood leaders and business owners, you're about to get this moved from this neighborhood, possibly into your neighborhood, and we'd like you to call us immediately before it gets a foothold here. You've given some thought to the possibility that some crime will move away from the cameras and the impact from that.
Right, and there are cases where there is displacement that occurs, and that's the other reason why the sample site is there. We could sit there and say, crime dropped by 30%, but crime increased in these other 2 locations by 10%, which would be a sample size. But we also looked at those bar behaviors and those behavior-based crimes that are occurring there at nighttime too. So they're not going to.
No, if you push it far enough away from the bar, it's not fun anymore. So,
yeah.
I
So
get that.
we figured that really won't be displaced. Those type of behavior crimes. So, but there's the case that might that.
I notice you got displacement of crime as a goal. So I think you're already aware of the fact that this doesn't eradicate it. It modifies it. It sometimes moves it.
Right. And it also goes, and moving with the city's goals of making downtown and all of Eugene a safer place, where you have heavy foot traffic, and if you can displace crimes where people are heavy in the pedestrian area, you lessen the crimes of opportunity.
I tell you, one of the positive things I get to hear sitting on this commission from citizens is how much safer they feel downtown, and how much safer they feel downtown at night. I don't quote statistics like 3,600 calls for service in that area to them, because I don't want to break their illusion. But I think...
We're trying to limit this to questions.
Fair enough, then I'll quit speechifying.
I know, we're going to get into that in a moment. You'll certainly have a chance, Edward.
No.
Any other questions? Okay, so here's what you have a question?
Yeah, have you looked at all about existing cameras for businesses? I mean, is there a map of that at this point?
We get access to those cameras. We don't monitor them, so if a crime happens, we can go ask them for those cameras. But with the cameras that are in play, they do not cover this area and would meet the goals of what this would do.
So there is an existing inventory of private cameras that you folks have and maintain?
existing private cameras?
Inventory of private cameras, in other words, a list of where all the businesses that have cameras are. Have you been doing any research with that, so you know where cameras are?
Yeah, we know in the downtown area, we know different businesses that have them. I can think of a case that happened on Broadway, but the problem with their cameras is they're not necessarily positioned, nor do they have the camera quality that we're looking to be able to do the things we want to, and the camera coverage is not there to reduce crime. We would intentionally put them up so that people know that they're there, because number one, we want to change the behavior of people, saying, hey, this is a camera, your behaviors are being captured on these cameras, so that way we change it. So.
Jim?
I don't think I read it in here, but maybe I missed it. Do you have a particular company that you're looking at? Or
No. I mean, I'm aware of several camera companies that are out there. We'd have to go put an RFI out there because it's a substantial amount of money that would go out there. But there's different ways to do it. I don't want to bore everybody to death, but you have companies that will give you all the camera setups, but you use an outside camera, they're going to charge you $750 to hook that up, and then there's other companies that it doesn't matter what camera you hook in there, but then they charge you more in the front end.
They'll charge you, it all depends on where they get their charges from. It'll go two ways. Yeah, I'm going through an RFP process right now, so I see you'll get, something's free here.
Right, there's an interesting company, Samsung has an interesting model where it doesn't matter what you plug into it, and they have superior camera systems, so they don't have proprietary software, so that might be...
That's nice.
Yeah, so there are options out there, try to reduce your cost and meet your goals, what you want to do.
And one other question, are you looking more at stationary fixed cameras or ones that you can move around? And maybe this is too soon to ask that question.
It depends on if you can reduce the cost of the camera and not have to put 3 cameras up, and you can put 1 camera. So I mean, I'd leave that up to the experts what they want to do, but we are not wanting to sit behind these cameras real time and monitor these cameras up there. Now, if there was a crime that happened and we're aware of it, and our dispatcher could tap into that camera to help the officers respond to it and give them information, absolutely. Anything that improves officer safety, we'd always want to do that. But to sit there and monitor it, and I don't have the study with me, I'm trying to find it, but there's studies that say out of 8 hours of camera monitoring, they're only accurate for 22 minutes of that.
And I wasn't talking about monitoring, I was just wondering if, a fixed focus, so it's only pointing at one point all the time, or if it's one that you can rotate and...
Yeah, and that's something that we want the vendor to tell us what to do, and here's the areas that we want to have, and what are their suggestions.
It's probably too soon to ask that question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. George, you had a question?
Any idea of how many, or is this too early to say also, how many cameras?
Yeah, I would say the same thing, that we don't know at this point. That's why we'd have to have the vendor to come out and take a look at the area of where we're trying to focus, what we're trying to do.
But basically, it looks like about three or four different areas of where the red and possibly the magenta would be on the hotspot map. That is maybe from Olive to Willamette and around the library area. Or Olive Alley to Willamette, down Broadway, and Olive Street.
It might go the half block, because you have to look at what the business is there, but you do have the nighttime traffic at the pizza place there and things like that. So
Broadway and Willamette, okay.
Yeah, maybe not do a full block, but you go half block over, half block back, by just looking at the crime pattern.
Okay, thank you.
So,
That's my question.
This question might be more for Chief Kearns. I'm just wondering how this is fitting into the department budget, if this is something you were budgeting for FY15, or is it something you're budgeting in for FY16 or what your strategy is?
First, my interest is whether or not we can get this off the ground in terms of the policy of the pilot project and the concept. If it looks like it could go somewhere, then there's a number of different places we can look for funding depending on the cost.
Okay, thanks.
James?
I did notice one thing on here, and perhaps I know that this is going to change because less than 1 ounce of marijuana. So that's probably going to come off and not be one of the issues, or have they decided on what is the, for recreational use, what they're going to be doing with that? You heard it?
Yeah. We will, just like we enforce open container and MIP and drinking on unlicensed premises, we'll be enforcing the marijuana laws after July 1st. There'll be fewer arrests for possession, probably. Right.
Yeah.
Public use.
Just smoke it out on the street.
Nope.
Any other questions? No? Okay, so here's the way I'd like to see it go. I know we have concerns about this, so I want this to receive a thorough vetting, and I want everybody to have their concerns addressed, and everyone to have a say-so in what they would like this policy to look like. So that being the case, what I'm going to do is make a motion that we accept this policy and proposal, and look for a second so we can do a discussion.
I'll second.
Seconded by George. First, I thought
I was just going to...
Motion, would you like to speak to it? Sure.
Well, I think this is a new version of the policy, isn't that right? Sergeant Vaughn, we've made updates to the policy that's in the package.
Closed circuit policy?
Yes.
Well,
It's 606. It's
I
got a
don't
date.
remember what was presented last time, but
We didn't have one like that.
We haven't seen it.
This is the first time we've seen it.
And this has a date of 1/20 on it, so I'm pretty sure we've made some changes since the last.
That's our first meeting since the date.
So if you want, one of us could walk through it.
Point of order as to the motions.
We have a
Or
motion and a second on the floor. So the chief was speaking to that, but we haven't actually voted on it. Well, we don't want, we have discussion, sorry. It's put me off for a second. We're in discussion on the motion. Motion is properly made and seconded. So I'll start a queue. Who would like to go first?
Did you have a point of order?
Point of order on it.
Go ahead.
I see the proposal and the policy is two different things, probably. And then they two different things for us to review separately that should probably have two different motions for discussion.
Okay, I'm going to rule that out of order because I think it's germane, one is germane to the other.
Okay.
I think it's proper. And I think we can give a good vetting in either end of it. So we'll move on to discussion, and the chief wanted to go ahead and explain the policy, so, and then we have Tamara, who's next? There. Edward. And Jesse. Go ahead, Chief.
Chief Durr, do you want to go over the policy, or we could have Sergeant Bowen?
Yeah, no, I can go over the policy. So the idea in drafting the policy up was to create a general policy that would cover any type of CCTV camera deployment, just not the pilot project. So, because let's say 3 years from now, we say, hey, this area is curtailing crime, but we want to move the cameras to another location. This way we don't have to redraft the policy up, so it was done in a generic fashion. And in there, we talked about under the policy that it's a crime prevention tool, what the intent of it is. It's not to monitor personal activities. It's not to infringe upon the constitutional rights of individuals, but it's used to record criminal activity and to prevent crime by changing those behaviors so the crime doesn't even happen. These would be unmanned or unwoman cameras, and they don't record sound, so we're not in violation of any other type of legal issues that might be there. So anybody walking down the street, we're not recording what they're saying. It's just those cameras in a location where there's a right to be there in a public place. So those are kind of the intents, and you can see A through F of what the intent is to do. And then going into the camera system monitoring, it's basically saying that, what I talked about before, that the intent is not to monitor these cameras live, but the cameras can be assessed and they at times to aid us in in-progress crimes, or to go back and view if there's a crime that happened. If it is an in-progress crime and somebody wants to view it, it requires the approval of the watch commander. So there is a supervisory oversight into the system. And then the next piece of it is the training. We'll train people that are using it. Again, going into prohibited activity, that goes into the constitutional rights to protect the privacy. I think probably the biggest thing is, depending on where the camera placements would be, is we'd have to make sure that, let's say it's on a 2-story building, we have to make sure that we're not accessing into somebody's private condominium or somebody's residential area. So that's where you have to be careful of that, and that's why that's there to assist with that. The next piece is the notification of the public. This is the intent, that we want the cameras to be overt, and we want to put signage on there letting people know, because that's also part of the strategy to change the behavior of the crime. The next piece of it deals with the video recording of it, and we referred back to Oregon administrative rules that were fall in alignment with the state of Oregon. We didn't talk about what the 24-hour period was. And I know in listening to everybody here, there was a discussion about the retrieval of information, who should be allowed to access to retrieve the video. And we kind of, what I did in there is I said that the chief or police or designee can allow people to view it. So I know there's a discussion, like say Springfield was in pursuit of a stolen vehicle, we know it went through Broadway and they need to get some type of identifier on it. We would allow them to view that video for whatever they need to do, but any type of actual retrieving and wanting the data from that, they'd have to go through the public agency request, which is covered on the next section of 606.51. And they would come under their regular public request for information, and it would be granted based upon review from our legal office in the city. And then the last piece of it is that there's an annual review of the camera system to make sure that these things are being done in accordance with our policy. And we'd also have a supervisor that's in charge of the camera project. That supervisor would be the lieutenant that's in charge of the downtown area. And the way we selected that for right now is because of that individual would be most likely where these cameras would be placed. So that's kind of the intent of the policy.
Okay, thank you. First on the list, I have Tamara, then Claire, then Jesse, then Joe.
Thank you. So I like the proposal about the pilot project. I like the area that was chosen and that there's a sample, a second sample location, or control location. I think that's a good way to run a program like this. I have had occasion to be downtown in the area where this is proposed quite a lot. There's a lot of businesses down there that are trendy right now, and there's a lot of activity down there at night, but there's still a lot of, I've been down there with women, and it's late at night, and we're concerned for our safety when we see a gentleman loitering outside the window, sort of looking like he's being aggressive with people coming out of the restaurant that we're in. So not that they're necessarily committing a crime, but it doesn't make people feel safe when they're downtown. So I'm hoping that the result of this will be successful, and that it'll make people feel safer downtown, even if that's one of the benefits of it. I like in the policy that the media is only stored for 30 days. I like that the watch commander has to authorize someone viewing the live feed. I like that it doesn't record sound. The only thing that I have a concern with is the second paragraph under 606.3.1, where it talks about the feed from the camera being accessed by other folks. First of all, I think it should say the live video feed from the cameras may be accessed. And this other city employee sort of concerns me, like who what other city employees, up in the paragraph right above it, it says the watch commander may authorize EPD employees to watch it for specific purposes, which makes sense to me. If you had something occurring on the street, you'd want to know that. But I'm kind of like, other city employees, who is that? And other law enforcement agencies, I suppose that makes sense. It's been stated here for official business only. I guess I could say official business only, or for the same purposes stated in this policy, the same purposes that EPD uses it for. And that's my main concern with the way that the draft policy is written. Thanks.
And I think this is what the chief is talking about, because I know he talked to me about this, and I think we struck the city employees piece.
It's not on my
Another revision.
copy.
Oh, I just downloaded this today.
Well, two different copies, but that's okay, Matt?
It's very possible that we just didn't clarify, but it could mean dispatchers, police auditor, or deputy auditor. We can clarify that better, but that's, I think, the intent.
Okay. Well, that's been struck. That takes care of your concern then.
Oh, yeah. I still would like to have it say live video feed, just to differentiate it from the recorded information that might be requested, video recordings that might be requested. And maybe that's already been changed as well.
You got that? Good. All right, let's move on. Claire?
Thank you. So I've already told the chief, and I said it at the last meeting, I'm not in favor of putting closed-circuit TVs on our public sidewalks. But I will be constructive in my comments rather than obstructive. So just one note in the draft memorandum, the use of the phrase displaced crime is actually concerning and may not be the best thing to communicate, because in my neighborhood, that means they're coming into my neighborhood, which I think Edward might have mentioned earlier. So I think we might want to think about that language there, because it does directly imply to me that, well, those people who were behaving badly in the Bermuda Triangle are now going to come down the street into Jefferson West Side neighborhood and maybe over into Whitaker. And so I question that. And I also generally question, although I totally understand in terms of the data why you would choose that corner, I question whether people who are drunk and tending to behave disorderly are really going to care that they're being filmed. Now, maybe after they've been arrested or confronted by police officers and it's pointed out to them that that's a direct result of the fact that they've been filmed, it might change their behavior later. But I think in the moment it's going to be hard to get those people to behave better if they're already inclined to be violent and drunk. In spite of that, I do think this is a very good start on the policy. In spite of my opposition to the whole concept, I think you've captured some very important items that address some of the concerns of particularly people like myself who have a concern around civil liberties. And Tamara pointed out some of them, the sections on retrieval and access, the provision that the data would it's actually going to be stored at least 30 days, but no more than 60 unless there's a investigation that requires it to be kept. So I think that provision of automatically erasing or recording over after 60 days is a really key point for someone who has the concerns I have. I also appreciate Tamara's comments about section 606.3.1. I think that could be a little more explicit. And I think Tamara's suggestion to explicitly align it with the rest of the policy, other jurisdictions or persons can access this for the purposes of, and just being a little more articulate about why we would let them access it. And I agree about adding the word live feed in there so you understand what you're following. And I'll just say, I did forward this to my former boss at the ACLU of Oregon to ask him, what do you think? Do you have any concerns? And, if I get some feedback, I'll definitely share that with the chief and this body if it's timely to do so. But I do appreciate the work that you've put into it and the thoughtful approach that you're taking to it. So thank you.
Jesse, then Edward, then Joe.
When we talked about doing a pilot project in the beginning, just seems a lot bigger than what I imagined for that when we first started moving forward with it. A couple of comments about the areas. The two parks, it seems like what that is really going to do is end up dispersing the same activity that's recorded in here as far as the types of crimes that are happening. I'm constantly stunned by the number of people who are cited in those parks over and over again for doing the same things when they know very well that there seem to be fairly frequent police patrols through, and they'll still be sitting around smoking a joint, getting ticketed for it and subsequently searched. But they're doing it right there. With the cameras, I imagine that does make sense that that's going to disperse that to somewhere near there that's not quite in view of the camera. And I agree with Claire when I was thinking with the Bermuda Triangle, that's the kind of stuff, the reports and the behaviors that I read about down there. It's the type of stuff where people are not going to they may have noticed that there was cameras on their way in, but they're not going to be caring at 2 in the morning when they're out in the street getting in a fight or whatever. If a policy has to be in place, if this whole thing's going to go through, then this does seem like a good start on a policy. But I'm not going to be voting in support of the whole thing overall.
Edward, Joe, and Jim.
I'm not sure I want to step into whether there should or shouldn't be cameras. There are already cameras all over every sidewalk. They're just in people's hands. So let's just not go there with that, and I'll talk about some more housekeeping stuff. First of all, let me thank the department for putting in this phrase, "shall not be used to harass, intimidate, or discriminate against any individual or group." Thank you. It's something I can go back to the HRC and say, look, they thought of that already. Freedom of information requests for your stored data. I think I put this forward in a previous mailing, something I sent to Jeremy to put an article in, a fellow up, I believe it was in Seattle, who nearly paralyzed their department with request after request that were legal, but that were beyond burdensome to the department. They literally did not have people to go through and look at all that he was requesting and make sure that they were not handing over images that would violate other people's privacy. So I would encourage you to reach out to the SPD and to other departments around the country that may have had this kind of abuse of FOIs. And they often come from a single individual, and look at what they've put in place in their policies that would protect Eugene from that. Because if Seattle finds it burdensome to have one individual make those kinds of requests, burdensome financially, where does that put our department? And if one person can think of it, another person can think of it. And I'd hate to see that become a sort of a viral habit of let's just ask for all the records of all this stuff over and over and over. And it just would take a couple of people to tie up the system in that way. And this comes back to what London found. London is the most video surveilled city in the world, and a lot of it is live monitored. And the hugest part of their expense is people. And in this, it seems to me the hugest possibility for expense is still people. It's the people looking at all of these records to see if they can be given over in a freedom of information request. For the rest of it, you are going to save, I think, staff hours. If you're going to be able to see something on that video that saves you having to knock on every business door up and down the block and see if somebody saw something, that's an advance. But if you lose that time back because you have to go back and look at all this data for the FOI requests, bad thing. I'll stop there.
Joe, Jim, and Chief Pastor.
Okay, Edward just talked about some of the stuff that I thought was really an issue, the whole question of third-party review. In other words, outsiders looking for copies of any of this kind of stuff, and I really think that needs to be spelled out and a line established beyond which you will defend it. Otherwise, you're just going to get into the Seattle nightmare, among other similar things. The other question comes down, well, there's a whole series of them, but, again, you have the personnel thing. Let's say you leave the cameras running all night, and now is someone going to come in the next day and review these things and see if you can pick up crimes and identify the suspects and go on? Because that means somebody's got to watch this stuff. So would we not essentially be better off having an officer in that vicinity rather than having the camera there? Because it's still going to consume the same amount of time to watch all that video. There's issues, I guess, about frame rates and resolution. If you want high resolution, you're going to have to go for lower frame rates. It's just the reality in the current bandwidth in the world. The cost of, looking at this, you've got several locations, probably a few cameras per location. So now if you're going to start to bring that data in, I mean, if you want to go out and grab one frame, for a tactical thing, you can do that kind of over a Wi-Fi network, and then you see what's going on there. But to monitor it in real time, you're either wiring the thing, which is quite expensive, and then you have to monitor it, or you've got Wi-Fi bandwidth, and there's only limited amounts of that. So again, you put a whole bunch of cameras up there, you could consume the entire available bandwidth within that area pretty quickly. So I think that there's some technical issues here. I also in my notes have this question about fees in terms of costs and procedures to deliver images to whomever, be it another law enforcement agency or a city agency or a city group or even a third party. I think that's going to have to be defined to some level in the policy. But I think you got to look about how you're going to access the data. I mean, one of the things that's fairly simple is just to put a lot of storage in the camera and let it roll over. Because, if something serious happens, then you go and you pull the camera down. But if you're looking for day-to-day stuff, now you got to get the information off the camera. And my experience dealing with video over at community television is that's really time-consuming. Even when you have fast systems and over a Wi-Fi, you are not going to have fast retrieval. A Wi-Fi is never going to keep up with the bandwidth on one camera, never mind several, especially if you're looking for high resolution. So I think those are questions that need to be thought through a little bit more thoroughly before you specify a system, because I think you can run up a lot of additional cost and not have the system perform to the level that you're looking at it.
Okay. Jen, Chief, Bill, myself, and then go on the second round, Claire and Tamara.
I just had one item. I thought the policy was pretty well written, I think. Definitely a very good start, and it sounds like there's some good ideas around the table to add to that. But in 606.2, the first paragraph talks about the chief, the cameras are placed around the city with the approval of the chief. But then in the third paragraph down, it talks about any unmanned stationary camera placed by a member of the Eugene Police Department have it approved by his or her division manager. So I just want to make sure that, to me, that sounds like you have to have 2 approvals to get the cameras placed. Is that accurate? Looks like the division manager and the chief both have to approve the cameras being placed. So that's what I want to make sure. Is that what I'm reading there?
That's bureaucracy.
Multiple approvals.
Well, that's why, I always try to streamline something if I can, rather than have, maybe...
Yeah, and I'll have to remember what exactly point I was trying to get at when I wrote that, so.
Okay. And maybe having 2 people approve it isn't a bad idea either, but... That was all I had for it.
Stumped you.
What's that?
Stumped you.
Well, I have notes on my master document, so I'd have to go back and figure out what I was thinking of.
You're setting up a check and balance system.
Yeah, that's what I said. 2 might not be bad.
Okay, Chief, you're up.
The reason I'm grateful that the Police Commission is looking at this whole policy and the pilot project is that I know this isn't going to be the last technology that the police department considers that might, raise fears among some people. So this seems like a pretty good, safe thing for us to have a thorough, comprehensive debate about. That's why I'm glad that we decided to stay on this subject. And for that same reason, I would just respectfully ask that we not take a vote on it, that you not take a vote on it tonight, so that we can listen to what you've got, make modifications, understand the intent of your words, even though the language may not be specific, and come back with another version for conversation. I understand that would take more of the Police Commission's time, and I understand how little time there is. But this strikes me as a good project to find a congenial way to arrive at a way to experiment with something that could be controversial. And so I would be interested in establishing a pilot project with a very clear beginning and a very absolute ending that reports back to the Police Commission so that you can see what the consequences are of running something like this, and you can see whether the benefit outweighs the fears that people have. And then also on the displaced crime, ideally we would put something like a camera up in a place where crime only occurs because of certain factors that exist there. So the kind of crime we're talking about is on the corner of Broadway and Willamette, Olive, that happens because of the businesses that are there and the traffic intersections that occur there. There's probably a number of factors that cause this behavior to happen only there. So we aren't going to have people coming in and out of bar fights at Broadway and Willamette because there aren't bars at Broadway. Might be a bad example. At Coburg Road and Harlow Road because there aren't a bunch of bars at Coburg and Harlow. They are at Broadway and Olive. So I don't think it's going to displace that kind of thing. It might displace people smoking pot to another area, but that's the idea of the experiment, to see what happens. That's all I have.
I have Bill,
The assistant
and
chief.
then myself,
Then
and
you had a
George,
comment.
and on the second go-around, Claire.
Bob, I think assistant chief wants.
I was trying to tag off of the chief here. The other thing is, don't forget the evidentiary value too. So even though those bar time fights and stuff like that might not be pushed out because of the drunken behavior, but we will capture that crime, which then can be used just as to prosecute. Where some of those cases don't get prosecuted, we don't know who the offender is, but now we have digital evidence of what did happen. So there's that other piece of it too.
Thank you. Okay, Bill, you're up.
Well, I want to start out by saying I think you did a great job in looking at the pilot program, and I do think the areas that you picked are good ones to try this at and see, because of there's a lot of public comments about some of those areas and the safety that they feel going through the downtown there. And then on this policy, I think, because I remember we all sat around at one of our meetings and talked about some of our concerns that we would have with this closed circuit, and I think you did a really good job in capturing most of those concerns within your policy. I know one of mine was who could look at it and when they could look at it, and I really appreciate you putting in that it has to be approved to go back and retrieve the data to do that. And then with the watch commander's approval to look at it live. The one question I had from Tamara's comment about that, changing that to a live feed on section 606, 3.1. But in your example of another agency wanting to look at it that night as a pursuit went through, that wouldn't actually be a live feed. That would actually be pulling back the recording, right? So I don't, I just make that comment. I don't know if you need to change that or if you just need to rework that. But I think if you take the live, put it as live feed, it changes that to move to the second section to do that. But and I'm very much in favor of giving the police department tools to help solve crimes, and I think that's what the camera and Assistant Chief Durr, made that comment that, this can be used to help prosecute some of these crimes that we have reported, that somebody gets beat up or somebody, something gets stolen or something in these corners and nobody knows, or it's he hit me first, or, they don't know that, but if you can pull up a camera and look at the film and say, no, that one, he's the one that hit the other one. So I think there's a value there that goes beyond this, and, and doing that, helping us prosecute some of these people that are committing these crimes, which will then in turn hopefully get everybody to stop doing those behaviors in those areas. So I'm very much in favor of doing this pilot program, and I think this is a great start for this policy. If not, I think it's really close to being where we need to be.
Myself and George, on the second board. So several things that I thought about during this is that my feeling is this is not 1984. We're not going to be putting a camera in your medicine chest and every time you go to it, it tells you what your next step is. I think we're talking about addressing a specific problem in a very bad crime area where people are intimidated, afraid, perhaps being victimized, weak people being victimized by drug people and people that are just bad behaving people. And I think if you use it in a pilot way, the way it's proposed here, to address those concerns, I think what we might see is a reduction in the types of crimes that are committed in this particular area. I also didn't like the displacement of crime statement in there because I know this has happened before. There used to be a lot of problems down on 13th with dogs and skateboards, and all of a sudden they made an ordinance, council did, that said no dogs and skateboards. Well, guess what? The problem disappeared. But they were up on Broadway running the dogs and skateboards. So it isn't really stopping crime, but hopefully this may effectively stop it, or at least slow it down to the point where we have to give it a chance. That's my fear, is that we will be so entrenched in our feelings about invasion of privacy that we just don't want to give something like this a chance. This is not written in stone. I think if the pilot project shows that it didn't work, then you don't do it anymore. That's probably not productive for the police department to continue to spend money and resources on something that doesn't work and hasn't done the job. So several things I considered about that was the fact that there's so many cameras around right now, as mentioned by Edward. There's just, right outside this building, there are cameras recording right now in the parking lot. If something, God forbid, happened to one of us going out there, I'd like to know there'd be a record so we could see, maybe get a license number of the car or whatever. But I also know that, people are feeling more, worried about the fact that they're being recorded all the time. It makes people paranoid. I would have thought it was illegal to film up a woman's skirt, but apparently a judge recently ruled it's not. So, where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? You're right now, with Joe's comment about where to draw the line as far as sharing this information with the public, I think the public records law tells you what you can and can't do. So you really can't, the police don't have they aren't the arbiter of what they can share and what they can't share. They may be able to redact certain information that is personal or that may impact someone badly. But I think the fact is, if police video cams can go out there to the public and be put on YouTube, I think anything else that you use can as well. So those are the things that I thought about when I thought about it, and I think we need to address those issues. So I'm gonna leave it there and move to George, and then we have Claire, Tamara, and Edward.
First of all, and I understand, your right to privacy, but this is a very, 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 very public place, and I don't have any concerns about privacy. Second of all, why embrace technology? I look at Vegas and how advanced they are in technology, and how far behind technology we are in Eugene. I look at the thing of the ability. There's not been a single case I hear, well, gee, we have too much evidence here. That's a bad thing. Evidence is really good. I think of the tragedy that happened in Ferguson and think if there were cameras there and live, very possibly we wouldn't have all the commotion and such like that. It would be more of an open, shut case of what happens, because we all know, we can all, everyone in the police commission, which we're all honest people, we can see the same thing happen and come away with as many police commissioners as, because we run it through our, our brain filters. So I think of recording this and I'll address to deter crime. Yeah, there are some drunks that come out and don't care. There's also some people that are drinking and will think correctly, gee, if this does spill out in the street, I am going to be recorded. But you're darn bet you that after a few behaviors are modified by being recorded, that is going to be quick to be out on the street. To address your things, Tamara, sometimes I go downtown, and I'm during the day, and I get a little, I kind of do the, whatever, the lion thing, pull my shoulders back. So these people, some people, by the way, I've not been hassled, but I'm fearful of being hassled. I'll, put my arms back and stir up. And I see downtown, the people, by the way, my issue that I'm fearful of, it's the same people over and over again. So I think in the modification, and that's what we want to do, is modify behavior of people going downtown. And even if we only modify 8% of the modification or of it, I think it would be a very, very successful pilot experiment. And I'm so thrilled that we're going to do this, and I'll call it experiment. Thank you.
Okay, James, you're next, and then we'll get a second.
Thank you. There's a lot of great discussion going around regarding this policy in the making. But then again, I have to also agree is that this is a chance to do an experiment on a high crime area to see, to determine whether or not the use of cameras will be actually be effective or effective at curbing behavior in those areas. I'm not opposed to a study to determine that, and I think that that's what the original intent is. I think that the drafting of this just adds more to it, provides some guidelines which we asked for, which I think is a good thing. I would also suggest that in the language, when we use the use of acronyms, that we make sure that we identify what those acronyms are before we actually publish them, because some people may not be aware of it.
Okay. We're in the second round now. Terry, first, and Tamara, and then
Thanks. So a number of folks have raised the issue about responding to public records requests. I know there's a federal law, but there's also state law that governs that, and Oregon's law is different from Washington's. We've had in-car video in police departments in Oregon, and we haven't had that challenge that Seattle has had. So, and I'm assuming it's because our public records law is more prescriptive and puts some burden on the requester. If it's going to cost a department a lot of money to respond to that request, they actually can turn around and say, well, if you want this, you got to pay us this much money for the staff time. But that said, I'm not an expert on that, and I wonder if it might be helpful if staff might be able, and maybe something Jeremy could provide to us in an update or a future packet, some information about how the city responds to public records requests, how the department handles those, because right now today an arrest record is a public record, and you can request all the arrest records you wanted and post them all up online if you wanted. But there'd be some cost involved, and the department would probably turn around and tell you that you got to pay that. So we do have a little bit of a buffer on that kind of potential abuse of wanting to get at this information. And if this is the policy that's adopted, it's really only around for 60 days unless there's a crime that's being investigated and we pulled it. This is a little, I wasn't an English major, but I do sometimes get into the weeds on phrasing under the analysis of crime in that paragraph. I find this sentence kind of awkward, and I don't understand the subject-verb relationship. The reason behavior-based crime was used as the baseline for analysis, there is a high volume of pedestrian activity and often leads to the fear of crime. So,
Because should have been put in there.
yeah, so there might be a way to make that more clear of what you were trying to express there. And then, I don't know if this was the intent on the duplication of the chief has the say on where the cameras go, and then the unmanned stationary camera won't be placed except with the division manager's approval. I think the first paragraph is saying the chief is ultimately responsible for where these cameras go and deciding whether or where they go. Presumably, a division manager would understand what the chief's direction is on that question. So, I mean, there's obviously a relationship between division managers and the chief and how those decisions are made, but maybe it can just be a little more clear. Again, going back to the memo around the displace, Chief Kearns explained kind of what the concept is there, but that's a very subtle distinction, and I think the chief understands it and he can explain it to us, but anyone else who picked up that memo and just read it would automatically think you mean you're going to push those criminals out of the area, not. So I don't know if discourage would be better, or if something that makes that more clear. Diffuse, yeah. And then, a number of commissioners have said, they support this pilot project, they support the idea of a limited trial on one particular intersection. But I would say that if we put these cameras up, and, there might be a positive effect. I'm not denying that there, is potentially a positive effect. But then that opens up the question of where else in our community are we going to be wanting cameras? Do you want them in our neighborhoods, in our parks, out, other intersections that aren't these hot spots? So, I think we really need to be mindful. We mentioned that London is the most surveilled society. Now they've suffered terrible, terrible terrorism, and they have good reason to be doing that, but they also don't have a constitution and a Bill of Rights that, is the reason you get some pushback from people like me on these kinds of things. So I think we just need to be very aware that once we open the door on this, then around the university district, we should have cameras over there. We should have them down, by 30th and Willamette. We need them there. And pretty soon there's going to be cameras wherever we feel we have the money to support them. So I just want to raise that. Thanks.
Okay, Tamara?
It's so hard waiting for your turn, but then you have so many things to say. Okay, so first of all, I guess for me the difference about London is, and my understanding is that England doesn't allow citizens to carry guns. So in some respects, allowing citizens to carry guns and have Second Amendment rights and have concealed carry permits is a deterrent in itself to some crime and if you don't allow that, then in my opinion, you end up with only the criminals with guns, and that's what's occurred there. And so instead of having those kinds of deterrents built into the fabric of their society, they have to use cameras to view what's going on. So I think that's a different situation, and Claire pointed out some other things that are different about that as well in that area. Several folks mentioned, and I've mentioned before about cameras on the street. I just find it ironic that in this day and age, people are concerned about cameras on the street when every single person that I know has a cell phone with a camera and they record things all the time. You only have to look at YouTube to see that that's true. It does continue to concern me that law enforcement and government ends up being so far behind in technology, and it's for reasons like it's right. I think it's great that people have constitutional concerns, and I think you should always look at these things through that lens. However, it continues to concern me that the public has technology that's far beyond what government or law enforcement has, especially if it's being used in the correct way and in a way that's balanced against constitutional rights. I think that the other reason why I like the location that was chosen is, the city and the city council say we want a vital and active downtown, and they do things. They have programs like tax programs that defer your taxes and things like that, or they encourage development, or there's other things that they do to encourage development downtown. And then when they have great businesses downtown, I mean, there's a new burger place downtown that's really great too, right next to the pizza place. Everything's kind of there together. It's not necessarily about people drinking. And people go down there, parking's already an issue. And then you have to deal with sort of feeling like you're walking the gauntlet when you go to any of these businesses. I think it's the responsible thing to do to make our citizens feel more safe if you're going to try to attract them to and build a vital downtown. Claire already brought up the point that I was going to bring up about in-car video. It's sort of like we're acting like we're reinventing the wheel with this situation with media being recorded and captured when in-car video has been in place for at least, I think, 8 to 10 years. And certainly they've already faced those questions and those issues with in public information requests for that video, I'm assuming. And Joe had mentioned about having an officer on the corner. Isn't that the same? I strongly disagree and respectfully disagree that that's the same thing. Anyone that's worked in any kind of an organization that has to look at cost knows that labor costs are far more expensive and a far bigger wedge of the pie as far as expense goes than anything else that you can do. And they just continue going up every year. I think that was all the points that I had. I think just the other thing is, I think that the chief made a good point about that some of the crime is unique to that area because of the type of businesses that there. That's not necessarily repeated. That same situation is not repeated in other places. For example, Voodoo Donuts, you have to have cash. So every single person walking out of that store likely has cash on them. I don't think that's true in most other areas in the city. So I think we do have some unique businesses and some unique situations down there. So that's another reason why I appreciate that this location was chosen first. Thanks.
You're welcome. Looks like we've gone well over our time and on beyond our break time. So I am going to go ahead and suggest that we table this until the March meeting where we take up the discussion again at that time. I'll make a motion to table until March. Seconded. Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed? It's unanimous that the motion is tabled. So we'll take our break.
Majority, another majority thing. This is scary. Unanimous.
Camera is on, everyone.
How's the location working?
It's working pretty well. Still getting used to it.
This belongs in the memo for
Used to having it everybody on
How
flat levels.
All right.
I was like, oh, usually I do.
135 minutes.
It's kind of hard, and so there's people that leave right because they're people. Like Billy used to be right next door to me. I never seen her.
I climbed 11.
The balance is,
Oh, you did? All right.
how much can you tell the public about it?
Start running up. Don't use the elevator.
My knees are so sharp.
This agency, yeah.
It's painful to take the stairs. Going upstairs is fine. Downstairs. Pretty innocuous.
Take the elevator down.
Walk up.
Nobody's on Bill today. Find him.
Did you? Find him?
Yeah, find him. He thought, I said, you're older than I. He said, I'm not older than you. He's like 5 years older than me. I saw him.
I talked to him about that one.
But you're not in that situation.
All right, Amy.
Wow. I started my employment history doing social service. And what I knew was regular shoplifters all knew that they had to keep a real camera and it didn't.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see the lawsuits changes.
That's how I started to do that.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Clear bed knocking you there?
No, I dodged him. So it is too bad.
I'm good, sir. How you doing?
Steelhead fish.
I know, where is mine? Well, you know, that has. Oh, that's it. I forgot about
Yeah, so what did your former boss say?
Oh, I just sent it him today, so I don't know yet.
Ended up being a really good thing.
He'll probably say,
The same thing you said.
yeah, you know, there's some good protections in there, and
Yeah.
while we don't like it, we appreciate those. And
Well, I keep thinking about, every time we bring this up, every time we've been talking about these towns, I picture that scene that was taken from that mobile phone in France. They had all those terrorists shooting. I keep thinking to myself, I don't know, you have a camera there, you could track that in real time. They could have maybe gotten more of a handle on where they were going, maybe prevented some of the things that happened down the line, you know.
yeah, I guess I always remember this scene in an episode of The Wire where the people smashed the camera and then went in and killed all the people in the house. So
That's a good point. Yeah, sorry.
those are hardcore criminals.
You most welcome.
I definitely.
There is more acid. I think, I mean, if we had 20
Well, the tenth will be. And yesterday, I was there.
Harassment.
That seems to be okay to people. I mostly check. I think I misunderstood. Whether or not what happened? But anyway, thank you for your clarifying questions. I think it's finally beginning to gel in my head that maybe I better figure it out. I think I'm way overdue for about a month. Oh, yeah.
Over a new job. No, I ran into her. Actually, I was going down work. Every 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, so she's working there.
Walking the line, that portion of the public is just going to call. I ran into resources.
But you have to have something sitting there that's going to have.
My mother, who's going to turn 90.
You have a church?
Passed along for possession of this
Oh, yeah.
business. So here's the two of us going to sit in the living room after this.
I saw that, I recognized
The restaurant.
Yeah,
Projects as a private. Because I think you're going to get
Around our house. Snow,
It's just like halfway to the other part of the great thing, and I used to you get that.
Sign system was to ask someone.
Yes.
I forgot to use it.
Oh, that's not good. You can have what I'm not eating.
Watch out for the guy with the
Window pops open. I see this app right there. You tap on it, it shows up. So you can pull, you know, you can start popping.
Why are you making faces at your screen?
Because I'm reading an email.
That'll learn you.
I'm just confused. That's why. Someone sent us an email about our terrible pedestrian safety record and saying Portland uses speed cameras and they work really well. But that's not what I was making a face about.
Moved here from a city that has a horrible safety record for pedestrians.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, there's many. San Francisco has the lowest rate of If you've ever been there and looked for a parking space, you understand why. I sold mine after 3 months ago. It actually got more tickets than I paid for it. The transit system works very well, but it is not a place you want to be on a bike.
Oh, really?
It's almost being from
It's all those Google buses.
So this film is right, and that's Matt's, Matt Owens back to that. Okay, we're ready to go back, we'll call the meeting back to order. And there's been a request that we move that top data collection one item down. This is shifting to citizens filming officers policy discussion with consent from the commission. Can we have that? Yeah, everybody nodding heads. So Matt, why don't you come join us and tell us about this discussion we're going to have on filming.
Well, I used kind of my go-to resource in when I'm asked to provide the commission policy material is the International Association of Chiefs of Police website. You know, it's law enforcement specific, and there is a lot of policy material on there, and there's a lot of model policies. There's basically an entire police manual that you could, I mean, the IACP has a model policy that you could pretty much outfit an entire police manual. It'd be very general, but it's good places to start. So that's what I provided you. If I know an agency has a specific policy, sometimes I can email or contact that agency. Sometimes they'll share it with me, sometimes they won't, depending upon who it is. I've had some pretty sophisticated, just anecdotally, some pretty sophisticated passwords and not encryption quite so much, but like authentication, that I'm the one receiving the, like a teletype. I've had to send teletypes before requesting it. And then I got one where the password that I called, they verified my phone number somehow, and I had to enter the last 4 digits of my phone number to get access to the policy that came. That was the Dallas pursuit policy. Anyway, that's probably boring to you guys. That's my interesting story. Yeah.
So they don't release those to the public, apparently.
Yeah. Apparently they don't. Anyway, so I tried to give you as many examples as I could find. Like I pointed out in the memorandum to you guys, there's 8 policies in there, but there's really effectively 4, because that group of the 3 kind of New England agencies and then that single one from La Vista, Nebraska, all have policy language that looks like they got it off a template somewhere. Although it's not a Kalia one, it's not a Lexapol one, I'm not familiar with it. And they were good. They were general. They injected some of the Supreme Court rulings about that, and in my memo I expressed that it's important and helpful. It's probably better as a training topic, but they've included it in their policy, and that's not wrong. It works for their agency. The Mannheim, Pennsylvania policy, I don't know how many people really went through it, but it's pretty clear they don't want anybody to videotape anybody in Mannheim, Pennsylvania. I was just going through it, and it's kind of like we've gotten out for if you're the subject of my police contact and you have a phone in your hand, you're pretty much going to put it down, or I'm going to take it, and I don't think that would stand up very well here in Eugene, Oregon. So. And it cited a bunch of, like the Pennsylvania Wiretap Act, which I am not familiar with, but apparently you can't audio tape somebody without their consent. They have the ability to say, hey, I want you to switch that audio off, and if they don't, then okay, I'm taking your phone, or a recording device, which I don't think is jives with what we do out there. So. Then there were the Washington D.C. and the Baltimore policies that were they're very agency specific, and I don't know if my point came across about the readability of them, but they go into a lot of detail about they're talking about they talk about some lead workers with specific names inside the policy, and they reference other policies inside of the policy about it. So the readability is kind of hampered, and it's I can tell it's just kind of so agency specific. It's a good place to start and to look at, because there's good material in almost all of them, except for maybe Mannheim, Pennsylvania. But I think what I would encourage, of course I'm not insisting, but I think your best bet to start would be as with the model policy as if it were our policy, and discuss from there, because then we can tease out, like the chief likes to do, is what are the concerns. This is pretty vanilla, and it just kind of runs the center, and so I think there's a lot of room for you to discuss that and not get bogged down in some of the other stuff that is present in the other policies.
Okay, let's start with questions first from that, what he's presented and what you have in your packet. Claire?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, anybody else have questions? Okay. If we're going,
I don't have any questions, but I want to thank Matt for putting all this together.
Just steal my turn in the queue.
This is questions. If he says it first, you.
Well, he was going to pass on the questions.
I'm going to recognize, Claire, do you have a motion regarding this or anything like that we can bring this up for discussion, or is this?
Sure. Well, we're not ready to accept a policy, so the motion would be to discuss the model policy as presented in our packet.
All right, we have a motion by Claire. We have a second?
Second.
Second by Edward, to discuss the contents and what should be in the policy. Okay, so go ahead. You have.
Thank you. I was going to say the same thing that Jim said, that I really appreciate the work that you did here. I thought your explanatory memo was really helpful, and you very much keyed in on the request of this commission from our last meeting. So really, really appreciative of it, and I think you brought us some really good examples of exactly what I was hoping we would see. So it's not, I mean, you gave us, a range, but in terms of the model policy, it's not overly prescriptive, it's not trying to detail every possible scenario, but it's laying out a framework that can make it very clear to both officers and, civilians, residents, what the policy is, how this should be approached, and if there, depending on where this lands, that if there is a question about whether the police dealt with a person properly, they will have this policy to be able to say, look, we followed the policy, this is what it says, it's been vetted by the police commission, and I think it'll just give everyone a lot more confidence in how to handle this situation, which is going to continue to occur and be a part of a police officer's day-to-day. I have to admit, I like the model policy, and I don't have any specific suggestions to make in terms of making it particular to Eugene or any red flags. So I'm sure other commissioners will have some good thoughts, and I know the department will look at this too. But I do hope that we will land on something and adopt a policy, because I think it will be to the benefit of the whole community. So thank you.
Thank you. I have Joe, George, Jim, and then James.
Actually, I think that from what's here, there's probably more than enough to generate a policy. Looking through, most of them are similar. Although you do find, an extra phrase here and there between them that I think is worth stealing. And so, why reinvent the wheel? And I think we have more than enough material to draft an initial policy for review, and I would like to see that happen. One thing that I will, this piece that I've been looking up on the internet on a variety of different things. There's a lot of comments about what should be in policies, written both from academic and law enforcement sources and also government sources. This particular piece, I do have a PDF for it, so what I'll do is I'll get it to Jeremy and send it around, but it's a review of the case law thus far, and a set of recommendations about the underlying principles that should be in there. I think it's really well written. So probably worth reading, but you'll get that in your weekly thing fairly soon. But I would like to see us move ahead to make a motion for you to proceed, on doing this, and then go from there. I think it's a great start, and the sooner the better.
George?
There's only one wordage that I don't. What is a reasonable distance? And that is my sticking point. Because is this reasonable? Is this reasonable? Is this reasonable? And because people are, people push spaces, and it would be real. And I don't know. I'm not saying I know the answer, but it would be real nice to have that defined, to say to somebody, it's 8 feet, or it's 6 feet, or it's 12 feet. But I also know it depends, it varies between the situations of, how enrolled and how engaged the officer is with the immediate problem that they're facing right at the moment. So that's the only, it's a reasonable is a slippery word, and I don't like slippery words. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, I have Jim, James, myself, Tamara, and now Edward.
Okay, now I'll say it, but I won't say much, because I'll just say ditto to what Claire said, because I thought the information was great, and I thought the model policy was right on, and your write-up, it's your summary for I mean, it was extremely helpful and very well written, outlining what the policies that you reviewed were, that you brought in to us, and your recommendation. I thought it was right on. And George, you talked about the distance and your issues on distance. I know there was, and I don't think it was in the model policy, I can't remember, but one of the policies did have some decent language that I thought kind of talked about it, to say that the officer will tell you where to go. And to me, that then you're making the decision on what that distance is, and they're saying, you have to be over on that curb, I need you to be behind that car, something that identifies, so you're specifically telling them, this is where I want you to go. But it is very difficult on the situation. I mean, you need sometimes you're going to say, you got to get out of here because they've got a gun and you're in danger, and if I have to pay attention to you, I'm in danger, so we're both in a lot of trouble right here if you don't get out of here right now. So in some cases, they're not going to be able to tell you other than, get the hell out of here. But, so that's difficult. I know that's a sticking point for you, but
what is
but I
reasonable?
think that's going to be a case-by-case basis is almost where it has to go. But if they have time to say, you go over there, then you have a spot where you'd better go to, and if you're not, then to me, that's where you're liable for obstruction and reckless endangerment or something. Those are outlined in here too, some of the reasons for arresting somebody that is maybe getting too close. So that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. James, myself, Tamara, and Edward.
Yeah, as always, this is great. This is a lot of information, and I think I agree with everyone else that you have enough here just to kind of copy and paste into a living, workable document. But I go back to I think about it, and I wonder, during the development of these policies and stuff that we are reviewing, at what point do we solicit the officer to find out what their view is? I mean, we can sit down and design all kind of barriers, restrictions, and recommendations like that. But the person that actually has to go out and use this policy, at what point, I would like to know, or I would like to encourage that during the development of that, if you have young officers that's on board and stuff, to kind of pull them to the side and run it by them, and that way we can bring some feedback to help us better understand how they perceive this thing is going to impact their job. The last thing we want to do is to try to push together a policy and stuff that's going to hinder the progress. Again, we were talking about what is a reasonable distance, things like that. I think that that's relevant to hear some feedback from them. I think that since this is going to be a part of how they govern themselves out in public and stuff, some point during the process, I think that they should have some kind of feedback. I would be interested in feedback.
They do. So I get to walk around the hallway, and everyone's like, hey, that policy that you wrote, that you sent out, Lowen's policy, whatever, I get that guff because I do give them a chance to weigh in, sir. It's in no particular order. Sometimes if we have a really developed policy and we're ready to, just based on timing or the interest or the choice of the commission, you might get it post-department review. But in this instance, you will likely get it pre-department review. Now, I'll be honest with you, there isn't as much, they give it to me personally in the hallway, so more than they do, in the actual, the email and documented, critiques of the policy. I think more of it's just maybe, I'd like to think it's playful ribbing, but maybe they really just don't like what I'm doing. But they get a chance to weigh in, and we make sure that it gets through a lot. Just so everyone understands, there's subject matter expert reviews for policies that are like a use of force policy wouldn't go through our approval process without being vetted by our defensive tactics experts. People who we consider subject matter experts internally at the department. All of them get, or nearly every one of them get a legal review. This is certainly one that would be to go across our city attorney's desk also. So there are other angles and perspectives that get to weigh in on this. Sometimes before y'all see it, sometimes shortly thereafter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have me and then Tamara. Edward and then Claire on the second. So the thing that I thought would be good here, and that we probably need to talk about is what good will this do if we don't get the word out? So then I thought, well, maybe just a PR campaign is what we need. You know, people need to understand what both sides of this issue are. You know, that we're worried about the officer having to worry about taking his eyes off a dangerous person to see what you're doing in the background, and if he tells you to step back, you getting a little closer isn't going to help make him feel any more comfortable about this guy who's trying to focus on. So maybe just letting people know, yes, it's all right to film the police, you know, it's okay. But remember to respect, you know, the officer's wishes for his own safety and the safety of bystanders and the safety of this person. And perhaps that would be enough, and see if that changes behavior. I don't know that it will, but I thought that would be one way to look at it. The other thing was, George, in your request about reasonable, what's reasonable? And, you know, this is a factor in the law for many, many years that people have argued over. There have been Supreme Court cases on reasonable suspicion. What causes a police officer to have reasonable suspicion in the first place to stop you? And then beyond a reasonable doubt, and I guarantee you there's thousands and thousands of cases on the books regarding beyond a reasonable doubt. What a reasonable man thinks is reasonable. And, you know, it doesn't matter because there's no way to define that. There's just no way. And so what it means is every circumstance is different. So every time a person is judged by what they did, they're going to have to, in their own mind, justify were they being reasonable. And the person who's filming is going to have to say, was I being reasonable? So, yeah, those things I think sometimes need to be in there. And lastly, what James said, and that troubles me more than any aspect of this, is that the officers have enough to worry about out there on the streets, that the fact that you're right to film him, and I mean, it's an absolute right, doesn't threaten what he's doing. And every circumstance is different. If he's just talking to someone and there's no danger, then that's fine. You can get close if you want. But if there's a situation, people need to be respectful. So I think we need to, at least have some idea of what it is they expect the public to do when they're taking an official action that might endanger themselves, the person, or bystanders. So, I think we should be soliciting that information as well. And so I hope we do if we decide to form a policy. Chief, you want to weigh in on that?
No, I just
Put
wanted to
yourself
add
in
to
the
the list.
queue? Okay. So we got Tamara, Edward, and Claire, and then the chief.
So this model policy is fairly succinct and clear. I think the one phrase, the only thing I'd say you might consider adding to section 4A1, where it says a reasonable distance must be maintained from the officer engaged in personally related to his duties. Bob mentioned some of the points I was going to make about that. That's a legal term of art, but of course, you know, the department would obviously train their officers on what that means. But we've used the term totality of the circumstances, based on the totality of the circumstances, and other policies, including the taser policy, use of force, some other policies. So if anything, I'd suggest maybe adding that to section 4A1, based on the totality of the circumstances, just so that that's a little more clear. That's also a legal term, and that's all the feedback I have on that.
Okay, thank you. And then we got Edward and Claire.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about reasonable distance, perhaps it's the last meeting, and I gave as an example, how far away is Captain Camcar? And the answer is, does any of us know how many feet away he is? No, we don't. So if a number were put into this policy, the only place it'd be useful is in a courtroom. People on the street aren't going to be able to use it in the moment. So I agree that's an incredibly sticky situation, and I don't know the answer to that. Interfering with the officer, obstructing the officer, again, that's a serious judgment call on each officer's part, as we saw last week in San Francisco when a public defender escorted her client out of a courtroom. He was promptly grabbed by two officers there in the hallway of the Hall of Justice and questioned about another crime. as the public defender says, you don't have to answer those questions. They cuffed her and attempted to arrest her. She was in fact detained for some time. It's now national news. Wow. And yet, those two officers thought that was sensible, even with a whole hallway of people shouting at them that it wasn't. So the whole business of what is interfering, what is obstructing, I don't know how we are going to get to that in this policy, or whether that's something that's going to get hammered out in law and cases over time and then put back into a policy. So I don't have any answers in this little speech here, just to say this is a messy question and we should give it some careful thought. Oh, and as far as you collecting information informally from the officers, is that graffiti about Lowen's a tree hugger?
Probably something to do with it.
I'm done.
Okay, Claire?
Thanks. Bob, you kind of answered a little bit. I was going to say the reasonable standard does tend to be the legal standard, and and sometimes that has to be decided by a judge, right? It ends up in court, and we're trying to avoid that with this policy, but nonetheless, sometimes that's where things have to be worked out. I didn't look in detail through every single policy that you provided us here, and maybe some of them have this. I wonder if the model policy or the policy that we move toward should be explicit that part of the purpose is not just to ensure that people can record officers, but that officers can have some control over the scene that they are engaged with in order to keep themselves and bystanders safe. So there might be some language that could be put in the purpose of the policy so that we're clearly saying, yes, there's a constitutional right, and we are going to make sure we honor that, and we also need to make sure officers can conduct their work safely at the same time. And I just want to reiterate that I don't view a policy like this as an attempt to hamstring officers, but to really give them protection against accusations that they aren't treating people fairly in the course of telling them that you need to step back, you need to step back. And I think there's also, I don't know if there's language in any of the other policies, or even language in any of our policies that make it explicit that the officer does have the authority to ask a bystander, can you please stand here instead of here, so that he can keep that person in their field of vision while they're dealing with the issue. So, there might be some language that could be in there that the officer does have the authority to ask the person recording to either move further back or stand in a particular location so that they can conduct their work and feel secure and safe, or be secure and safe. So those are some thoughts I had.
Chief, and then James.
Yeah, those are exactly the points I was hoping to make. Not the suggestion on language, but the concern for the officer's safety. We spend a lot of time in policy, and we should, concerned with the rights of the community and the constitutional obligations we have to people in the community. This is one of those which is really more about the officer's safety to me than it is a lot of things. There's two recent videos, one that George described, where officers within arm's reach of a guy couldn't possibly have anticipated that when he pulled his hands out of his pockets, he'd be shooting him, which is exactly what happened, killed an officer. And there's another one, this is the advent of body-worn videos is going to make a lot of these more available, where an officer chats with a domestic violence suspect over the phone, a 20-some-year-old man and a 20-some-year-old police officer, and the suspect agrees to come out and talk with him. The officer, and so what you see from the video is the officer's perspective as he's talking with this calm 20-some-year-old man about the domestic violence that he was involved in some days earlier. And without warning, there's no way any human could have anticipated this. Within arm's reach, the suspect pulls his hand out of his pocket with a gun and shoots and kills the officer. And so the reason I've mentioned these is that the officers have to be prepared for what's possible, not what's probable, but what's possible. And they have good reason to be concerned about what's possible. And the suspect in both those cases, they knew precisely what was in their minds, And when someone is videotaping an officer and wants to get a good angle, so over their shoulder or constantly adjusting themselves to be in their space, and which to the officer is unpredictable, in the videographer's mind, the officer has nothing to fear from them. They're just trying to get a good video. But in the officer's mind, they have no idea what's in that person's mind. They don't know what's in the mind of the person they're trying to focus on and arrest. They have no idea what's in the mind of this person behind them. And since there's only a nanosecond to react to the individual who's pulling the gun out of his pocket, then dividing that officer's attention is an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do. And so really the question shouldn't be what's reasonable in the mind of the videographer, but what's reasonable in the mind of the officer. And the better we can develop a policy that gives the officer the authority to direct someone to be in a certain place until the officer can finish their business, is going to make our Eugene police officers a lot safer.
Okay, James, and then Joe, and then Jesse.
Well, Chief, thank you for that, because that kind of goes over into what I was going to come up with, because the question is about reasonable, what is reasonable, and I would think, based off of what you said, that I had written down here, jotted down, officer safety discretion. Because they have to have discretion on the how they're going to respond, and if they feel that it is something that's going to jeopardize them or another person, civilian or something like that, they have that discretion to ask people to move back or stop or whatever the case may be. So I don't know if this would be the appropriate language, but discretion, officer safety discretion is certainly well worth considering.
Safety discretion.
Thank you, Joe, and then Jesse.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of things here. I mean, first of all, the conflict already exists. I mean, there are people out there reporting police, so, and that's not going to go away. So the issue is accepting that reality and trying to set some parameters for it that make it better both for the public and for the officers themselves. And so the concept of a PR campaign and reaching out to the public and educating the public has come up several times during our discussion. And I don't want that concept to be lost. What I would like to do is we'll finish this discussion, and then I would like to make a motion that we add some time to our agenda to look at how we might work up or contribute to a campaign to reach as many people, once this policy exists, to allow, allow them to know that A, they have a right to record this stuff, but at the same time, they must do it responsibly and define what that means and reach as many segments of our public as we possibly can with that campaign. So when this discussion ends, I do intend to make a motion to that effect.
All right, Jesse, you're next.
Chief Kearns' comments made me wonder, because last time we talked about this, the question was whether there should even be a policy. Now it seems like we're honing in on a policy. But there's a couple of issues. There's people who are videotaping, but exactly the same kind of issue as people who are just watching. And I've seen this quite a few times on ICVs, where the people that the arrestee was drinking with, or his friends, or people that are just on the street are hanging out, and they aren't necessarily videotaping, but the officer has to tell them to back up. And it seems like this policy it's exactly getting at not just people with video cameras, but that might just be part of a policy about what discretion officers have about telling people to move back. Because really right now, I think that the only thing they've got is the fact that they can arrest somebody for interfering with the police officer. They say, get back or you're interfering with me, and I'll arrest you for interfering with the police officer. This would give some guidance in that for, like I said, just not just people with cameras, but every bystander who might be getting too close. Yep.
Okay, anybody else? We pretty much finished this one. Trying to go back to the original motion was by Claire to discuss the policy, and so we've done that, so I'm not even sure we need a motion for that. I mean, a vote on that, but we've already done that, so Claire, if you want to withdraw your motion, I'll let Joe put his motion on the table.
Sure.
Okay. Joe?
Okay, well, we didn't,
But would we want a motion to, do we need a motion to ask Lieutenant to continue to work on the policy?
Well, that's what, apparently, Joe, you have some motion that you wanted to make to address that?
well, okay, if that's okay, I'll try two motions. Number one is, the first motion is to request that Eugene Police Department continues to work on this policy and to bring us a draft policy for review. That's the first motion.
Okay, so that's a better motion. It's a more specific motion. I like that. All right, so now we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Claire. Motion by Joe. Everybody understand the motion? Any discussion on that? Seems like a simple one, okay? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No? Okay, so we have the motion that you are to continue to work on this and bring it back to us with a final policy draft.
Yes, sir.
That we can discuss.
Okay. And then, second motion is that we add some time to our agenda to discuss how to communicate these issues with the public.
Is that tonight's agenda or a future agenda?
Future agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Would you repeat that motion?
Yes, I would like us to add a future agenda item to discuss how we want to proceed, or if we want to proceed, with a public outreach campaign to work with the public on these issues.
Okay. So this is a separate issue from actually forming a policy. This one deals with public outreach, so you'd like some time on the agenda for that. Okay, the motion's made. Do we have a second for that?
I'll second.
Seconded by Claire. Any discussion on this? James, and then George, and then Tim.
Okay, I think it's a good motion, and I can support that, but I would think that this would come down to a committee, because if we're going to go out and get people, public input and stuff like that, it would be more appropriate to form a committee in order to do that. So I think it's a great idea, but.
Okay, George?
I think it's a great idea, but I don't know whether that is in the, and I'm looking, I'm not saying, but it's in the scope of the police commission to do that. That's my comment there.
Okay, Pamela?
I can support the motion, but I think that I'm not in favor of having it on an agenda until we're done looking at the policy. I think that would be premature, so I'm not in support of specifying a month to have it. I'm just saying that we might look at that in the future. I mean, the motion's for us to discuss
Right.
having
Clarifying.
public outreach.
You're clarifying, you're not asking for a specific date to be on the meeting?
No, I'm not.
Okay, all right.
And you're also not making, your motion does not also include, like consensus that we're going to do it just to discuss it. Or could you restate the motion, because I'm not
Well-
clear on that.
The motion was to discuss, to discuss an
Yeah.
outreach.
So I think, for example, one of the parts of the discussion might be whether we form a committee. Other parts might be, what sorts of ideas would we want to consider? And I would think that this would be a good discussion to have over a period of time. But if what we did was we had it a little bit at a time over several meetings as this policy comes into effect, that we'd be in a good position to move ahead to do it once the policy exists.
Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so Claire.
Well, based on your last comment, you might not accept a friendly, I was going to make a friendly amendment to the motion that we have that discussion about public outreach once we have adopted the policy. You're good with that?
Recommended the policy.
Thank you, yeah.
I would-
Once we know there's a policy that we are going to do outreach on.
Okay.
I mean, I would prefer to do them simultaneously, concurrently, I guess is a better word. I would like to do it serially, however, my sense is that if we wait to do it seriously, or serially, we lose some time opportunity. That if we have some ideas in place, then we'll be better able to act upon them when the policy is ready. So, if it's the will of the group to do it, serially rather than concurrently, I'll go with that, but my preference is to do it concurrently.
Okay. Well, then I won't make the friendly, but I will trust our capable chair and vice chair to help us manage our time wisely.
Okay, so with anybody else discussion on this second motion, Jesse?
I'd just ask the chief whether this might be the type of thing that the department regularly issue public information,
Press release?
Press releases. Like the adoption of a policy might get a press release that gets the press interested in it for a couple of days, and there's some stories in a news article, and that might be more traction than we could ever get by just going around asking groups for input.
Yeah.
If you agree.
Yeah, we could talk about all of that.
Okay.
That's okay. Well, I had myself in there, I'm going to give you the preference, I just wanted to, I think that I'm going to support the motion because I think it's good to have outreach to the people, but I hope we're not placing more importance on this than we really need to, because this all started because of a couple of issues that were brought to the CRB about people being interfered with while they were filming the police, but I'm not seeing the hue and cry that I see on other issues that involve the police community. So I really hope we're not going to be spending an inordinate amount of time, and I will, if the board votes to do that, we'll put it on the agenda. We want to get our work plan done too, so you're right. Okay, all those in favor of the motion to take this up for debate, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda. Now we've mixed it up a little bit. I think we're going to stop data. Okay. So Captain Camcar, we're ready for you to bring stop data to us. And then we have the chief. Another round.
No police officers are like surprises.
Yeah, generally.
That's a bad point.
In the old days, a case of beer or something.
Wow, it's a
Days
gift.
of the old days.
Is this video camera actually going?
Yes.
So it's gonna highlight my bald
Yes,
head?
unfortunately.
Hey, not a problem.
Yes.
That's great.
You're in good company.
Powder next time. Little powder.
That's
Accepted, accepted.
great for my confidence.
Would urge you to take a close look at the current chief of police of San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
Man, it's been a bullet head since he was a lieutenant.
Oh, wow.
Clean shaven. A lot of his officers copied after that. You need to get rid of that.
Yes,
Yeah, your hair's getting kind of
I
long
did
here.
this morning.
If you would walk us through this, what you proposed here, we appreciate it.
Was that for me, sir?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just, well, thanks for having me. I understand that the purpose of me being here is to talk about our progress with the our demographic data collection program. For the sake of time, and I'm not going to go over the entire memo and read word by word about what's been going on, since I know you've already got the packet. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that's been happening in the past probably a year and a half or so since this initiative took place. This whole project is very dear to me personally and professionally, and it has been to the chief as well. And some of you may be aware, back in 2005, 2006, chief at the time, I think he was a lieutenant, And he spearheaded an effort on the part of the department to get a number of us to become trainers on the topic of racial profiling. And he, in fact, went down to Los Angeles himself and became a trainer. We ended up coming back and went through additional training. Finally, we became certified by the Museum of Wiesenthal and put the entire department through the racial profiling program, and which was a 10-hour training course. And we were the first agency to do that. And since then, we've been continuing on that path. And so I'm pretty pleased with our progress and where we've been. But all of us would have loved to have been able to, be at a point where, rather than being in the middle of the project, be able to be at a point where we can actually report to you about the end of it. But for a number of reasons, it hasn't taken off as fast as we wanted to. Almost a year ago or so, as you recall, we have an advisory committee that helped us with this project. And I just wanted to mention, I was so impressed working with these folks. Of course, we had Dave Fedanki from ACLU. We had Mr. Eric Richardson from NAACP. Our own police auditor, Mark Gisner, was there. University of Oregon, Lane Community College, and a number of other constituents. And then in addition to that, we had the police union representation on the board. And they have been fantastic to work with. I can't say enough good things about their level of cooperation in this project. And over the past few months, probably the biggest accomplishment, if I can say so, is the work that Sergeant Lowen, is he still here, or
No.
he's gone already? He's probably in bed by now.
He's hugging a tree.
He's probably hugging a tree. With his help and input from you and everybody else, we were able to put together that professional stops policy. And the thing that I like about that policy is that I think I can say with a certain degree of confidence that we are the only agency in the state of Oregon with a policy that is consistent with what's being taught across the United States. I have looked at a number of policies across the state, and nobody else uses the language that we're using in our policy. In particular, what I'm referring to is how racial profiling is defined. Now remember, as part of the class and the presentations that we have, and some of you may have seen an example of that, one of the things that we do is when we ask people about racial profiling, we hand them out a 3x5 card that says, define racial profiling. And inevitably, it's all over the board. And with police officers and, the community members. And we wanted to make sure that we're on the same page. And that definition at the top, when you see on the policy, really captures that. And that definition was taken specifically from what we've been training. So in essence, our policy is exactly what the training is. They go hand to hand with each other. So I'm pretty happy about that. The next step in that process was working with SunGuard, and I'm sure you've heard about SunGuard by now, and to develop this program. And then we had the committee identifying the data points and so forth. We've done all of that, and we are within a week or two of basically signing the dotted line that would allow SunGuard to move forward with their programmers to be able to do the mechanics in the background to be able to give us a program that we need. There's been, for a number of reasons, workload, capacity, SunGuard's capability of being able to handle all the needs of our organization. Things have just didn't take off as fast as we wanted to. But we're there. We're almost there. I'm pretty happy about that. The only other thing that I wanted to mention and highlight for you is that you may have noticed in my memo, I wrote down that we eliminated ethnicity out of, from one of the data points. Without going into too much detail, the recommendation that we got from LECC was that a place like Eugene, we're not a very diverse community. It's, we don't have thousands and thousands of minorities and people from different ethnic backgrounds. And to have both race as well as ethnicity, to capture both of them, it does two things. One is it adds one more layer for the officers to try to figure out in the midst of things about, well, what is that? What does that really mean? And we wanted to kind of simplify that for them. And then the second part was that what LECC told us and what they recommended was that because of the size of our community, whatever data we capture for ethnicity is going to be so small that they're not going to be able to use in their analysis. It's not going to give us a meaningful report. Even in Portland, a much larger community that they've used that, race is what's been helpful for them as opposed to ethnicity. So that's the reason for eliminating that. The good news is that now that we're using NIBR's reporting system, Hispanic is now included in the race category, whereas before it wasn't. So we're able to capture that. So within the next couple of weeks, hopefully we'll have this paperwork done and just a couple of minor things that I've got to do. And then SunGuard is going to go to work. They are telling us that more likely than not it'll be January of 2016 before we can launch the program. There are a number of other priorities, and so there's competing interests in terms of what needs to be done first. But that's, although it's not as fast as soon as what we want it to be, what that's going to allow us to do is to go back with the committee to try to develop the pilot project. And the pilot project that I'm talking about has to do with getting the number of officers together, because just like with any other program, once you get the program, you're going to have to work the bugs out of it. Getting the officers identified, making sure they're trained on the policy, making sure that they understand what we're talking about when we're talking about race and ethnicities and the differences between a discretionary stop versus a non-discretionary stop, and how they should fill out these forms, under what circumstances, and all of that. And then hopefully use the pilot program to be able to come back and then eventually roll it out to the entire department.
Thank you. Any questions for Jim? Okay, Jim, and then James, and then Edward.
I noticed that, and you spoke to the topic about removing ethnicity from one of the data points to collect.
Yes.
It's still in the policy.
Yes.
Is that going to, I assume that's going to be taken out?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure that.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I didn't want them to conflict. And,
yes.
Okay. That was all I had.
Okay, James?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Captain Kamkar. The point that was brought out about race and ethnicity, the difference, I guess I kind of like to understand a little bit more. I would think that ethnicity would be the preferred term versus race, based on the fact is that if you have a African American and you have a Somali, or if you have a Russian versus Yugoslavian, then we're talking ethnicity and not particular race. So you would be able to, I would think that it would be better to define under that term than just the umbrella of race itself, because race itself can have a lot of different ethnicities, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Involved in that. So I was just, it's just interesting that, and I never thought about that, but I would argue that there are specific differences that would be different. So maybe I'll just do a little bit of research of my own on that. Yeah. Interesting.
If I can quickly properly respond, you make a very valid point, and there are very legitimate and valid reasons to capture ethnicity. But one of the things that we did was, as I mentioned earlier, is looking at our demographics here. And at the end of the day, whether we use ethnicity or we use race, the gist of what we're trying to capture here is whether or not bias is what's used to make that traffic stop or to take whatever enforcement action.
Oh, okay. All right, so it's the focus.
The focus of it is to see that, and to see that we're not either profiling, racially profiling, or that, we're free from bias-based policing. So.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That helps.
Jane, Ed, who's next?
Yeah, actually, speaking to what you were saying, James, race and ethnicity in police work, you don't pull somebody over, I would imagine, because they look Russian.
Yeah.
Right. So I can see we need some really simple distinctions here. Why was this stop made, and so on and so forth. I know over at the Human Rights Commission, there was a lot of hope that the data would be collected on socioeconomic status, homelessness. The chief has explained to me, and I think to this commission, some of the difficulties in gathering that information and how much it would require prying into people's personal lives. It does occur to me that in any stop, if it proceeds as far as you asking the person for their ID, and their ID is from Wisconsin, you're going to ask them if they got a local residence. There's somewhere in the computer, the fact that they say none, get recorded.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. what you're
Someone say to
saying.
you, I went all the way around the barn, I'm sorry, it happens sometimes. So you stop someone, you say, where do you live? You live here in Eugene, your ID says you're from Wisconsin, and they say, no, I don't have a home. I'm homeless. Does that get recorded somewhere in the stops information?
Either on the traffic citation, for example, is that what
Somewhere,
you mean?
just anywhere.
Somewhere. Typically what happens is our officers will ask, where do you want the court to send you correspondences?
Good way to deal with that, okay.
And sometimes people provide, and we've had people that provide a mission, address to the mission,
right,
for
a
example,
PO
who are
box or
homeless.
something.
And that's what ends up happening is that they put some address down so they can communicate with them. But there are times when they don't have that information, and there are times when the officers write down declined.
Yes.
Because people just refuse to give. And there are times where they may write down transient, which is a common industry standard terminology.
It is. I was just trying to figure out if there was a way to come back later and pull that homelessness data out without actually having to include it as another data point to capture. In other words, if it's captured elsewhere in the process of the stop, does it need to be in this list? To my mind, the answer is no, as long as we could, in theory, go back later and pull that out and say, yes, 20% of downtown pedestrian stops were of people who's transient.
Well, we commissioners to be mindful of the time. Again, we're running up against our time commissions commitment, so we have to move along. Go ahead.
Yes, no answer.
I guess we can always pull data, even today, without having a computer system.
Yes.
It would probably take somebody who's going to go through thousands of citations,
But it is
looking at
doable.
one by one to see what, and then putting them on an Excel sheet of paper.
I'd just love to be able to go back to that commission and say, yes, in theory, it's doable. They're not ignoring that as something that could be contributing to a stop.
Okay. Thank you. And Tamara, she had one.
Two things. Thanks for coming to our meeting today to give us an update on the work of the group and on the stops data. I'm really pleased to see that the policy that looks like it was largely the one recommended by the police commission, was adopted by the police department, is in place. I also think it's, needs to be mentioned that it looks like it's a great honor to have the data that was included that'll be included in the demographic information collected by the pilot project to be endorsed by the LECC as the new standard for the entire state of Oregon. That sounds like that's quite a big deal, and that they I really appreciated the work that was done on that to capture that. So, once again, the Eugene Police Department is sort of out in front of it over some other larger Oregon police departments. So that's quite a commendation for the department. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we're done now, Captain, again, we'd like to thank you for taking the time tonight.
Thank you.
And brief us on this. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the chief's report.
Sure. Thank you.
I'll just touch on a couple of things.
Go ahead.
All right. On the slide with chief's activities, the only thing I'd point out there is that the executive leadership seminar that I attended in Seaside covered school safety. There's a number of different school safety programs, so we got a briefing on that. And we saw several presentations on how the new marijuana law, Measure 91. So we heard a little bit about what OLCC is working on to establish rules and what the experience has been like in Colorado. And then we have 3.5 call taker vacancies. We have 16 candidates going to background, so that's one of the best situations we've had with our staffing out there in many years. And we have 15 police officer vacancies. 16 are going to backgrounds right now, but on February 20th, February 20th is the closing date for another application process. So we're doing these two processes side by side so that we can combine the finalists lists and hire the best candidates from both processes.
So Phil, how many vacancies, Chief?
15 right now. It'll be 16 by the time we can start hiring. He's getting ready to retire here in the next few months. And then on the crime slides, there's one marked bike thefts. Bike thefts have been a priority for our crime reduction strategy. So I asked the crime analysis unit to start picking it up and letting us know, doing some analysis on it and reporting to us regularly. What you can see on this is that more than $500,000 in bicycles are reported stolen every year, 1.6 million in the last several years. It looks like there was a decline in 2014, but I don't know if that's because of the new records management system or if there really was a natural decline. But if it did go down, it isn't because of anything the police department did. So it could be better, lock mechanisms. Maybe people are more careful. Maybe people are reporting less. But that, I want to keep looking at these figures and see if it isn't an area that we can start paying some attention to. And then, with the motor vehicle accidents, our traffic enforcement unit someday should probably come here and give a presentation on what our crash reduction efforts are like. But they're so predictable. Where crashes are going to happen is just the most predictable safety issue that we address. And we've got to figure out how we can change those numbers together with traffic engineers. So you can see on this graph that shows 3-year average of time of day, you can see it happens at the same time of day every day. I mean, it's really predictable. So we should very carefully be designing our efforts around that stuff. Time of year, all of that.
And that's 5 o'clock, eh?
Yeah, 5 o'clock. Yep, everybody's going home for dinner. And then there's a couple of slides in here that I don't think I normally include, but just in case it's of interest to you. These are called the citywide, this one's a citywide case conversion slide. And what it shows is, the conversion is a call for service that's converted into a police report. So if we're dispatched to a call, and by responding, and the call for service is converted into a police report, that's a conversion rate. At what rate do we answer calls and convert them into a police report, okay? So before we got the records management, the new records management system, the conversion rate was at one level. Now it's at a lower level, and partly because of the complication of completing a police report now. Learning how to use an entirely new system in an entirely different way, and entering crimes in a foreign national incident-based reporting system that is so very different than what our officers have ever had to do before. So there is a learning rate, and we knew that would exist, and so we're monitoring how our production of reports today compares to that. That's why we have those slides, in case anybody was wondering. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, I was going to tease you again that your top 10 list. Oh, I thought you called on me.
No, I said
apologize.
Jim, and then I said you, but you heard you, so that's.
I did.
The top 10 list only has
I'm cutting you out, but it's, oh, I tried to cut you out last time, didn't I?
Go right. You got the floor.
You had a Team 51 ride-along? Team 51.
That's the one of the teams that starts at 9 o'clock at night on Sunday through Wednesday. Patrol team.
So did you go each night or just?
No, I just went one night
Okay.
with Jesse Smith, and he arrested a DUI driver. There were 2 DUI crashes that night. That both happened while he was arresting this other driver.
Oh, no.
The driver he arrested was a 30-some-year-old woman that was less than 5 feet tall and less than 100 pounds. And he just did a great job with it.
And the commercial burglary increase, is there anything in particular they're taking? Or is there a target or is it just all kinds of things?
This isn't that one guy.
Yeah, we think it was one guy who was breaking into a variety of businesses. I don't remember off the top of my head what he was taking, but that's no longer an issue.
Okay.
And in fact, burglaries so far this year are lower than they were last year.
Well, that's always good too. And the one other comment I had was, and I know Tamara made the comment last time, we have the top 10 all the way through here, but there's only 8 listed on each, so you might.
Yeah, well, we don't share the top 2 with you.
Oh, just the bottom 8, okay.
It's a need to know basis.
I don't think I said that.
It was me.
No.
Oh, was it Claire? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You're trying to ignore her,
I was
aren't
like,
you?
I don't care.
Yeah, well.
No,
Claire and I are going at
it
it
is the
tonight,
top
so.
8. I don't know why.
Okay,
we don't
Claire?
do that.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I was again going to say there's only 8.
I know.
But that's
I stole your thunder.
no, exactly. I was just curious, on the 4-week citywide map. I think it's the first time we've seen the little masked man head, assuming it's a man,
Person.
indicating robbery. So can you remind us what the distinction is between a burglary and a robbery?
Oh, yes. A burglary is breaking into, well, it's entering a building with the intent to commit a crime. Robbery is a theft, essentially, which involves force. So it can be force by threatening the use of a weapon, or it can be a fight in order to steal something.
But there's another person involved who's a victim.
Yeah, and they're,
I mean, a in-person victim as opposed to coming home later and being a victim.
that's right.
Do we think these, any idea if these robberies were connected?
Yeah, we know quite a bit about them. We haven't made all the arrests.
Okay. And then I just happened to notice on the top 10 on the CFS location services.
Calls for service.
That Valley River is on there with 33 hit and runs. Is that the parking lot where people back into someone else's car and they don't leave a note and they just leave?
Yeah.
And so they call police officers for those?
Well, we get a call. We don't always respond.
You don't always send someone out, but you take a report?
Yes.
Okay. That's it, thanks.
Anyone else? Well, thank you, Nancy, for keeping us up to date with everything that's going on. Sounds like we got a pretty busy schedule. When we are at officially now the end of the meeting, commissioner comments, so who would like to go first? Claire?
Well, thanks, everyone. Really good meeting. I think our meetings, other people have made this comment that we've been very productive and feel like we're making progress. And then we just got I think, great kudos from Lieutenant Kamkar about our professional stops policy and the hard work that we did on that. I think has paid off in terms of getting aligned with what the kind of best practices are in terms of trying to prevent racial profiling. So that was pretty neat to hear. I just wanted to let you know, some of you may have seen in the paper some months ago that the ACLU of Oregon has released a mobile phone app that's called the Mobile Justice app. And I went to a briefing they gave here in Eugene on it, and it's only available for non-iPhones. Since I use an iPhone, I don't know what everyone else is using. Android, thank you. But eventually be available for the iPhone, and it is directly related to our looking at a policy around recording police activities, because that's what it's for. And they issue it with information about how to do that safely and how to be, stay within the law, and also know your rights information. And the difference between using this app and just recording on your phone is the video automatically uploads and is emailed to the ACLU of Oregon and actually doesn't stay on your device. And then you can also send them a report. There's another part of the app that lets you fill a little report and give them whatever information you want, either about yourself or not, and you can send that to them. And then that's considered confidential information from them in terms of their role as an advocacy organization and the work they do around legal issues. But it was a really interesting briefing, and I thought it was an interesting piece of technology, and other ACLUs have developed these, and so they're getting spread around. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Well, I'll go ahead.
Claire, do they come with any instructions?
Yeah.
Do they direct people to obey police when asked to step back?
I think so, yeah. But I don't remember the text, the actual details, but yes, there's some information about how to be safe and legal.
Yeah, again, this is, every time I come to Police Commission, it's always a pleasure to sit down and talk and listen. Every day I walk out of here a little bit wiser, I hope. Certainly I pick up more information, and I appreciate everybody's input. I also like to commend AC Durr, Captain Kamkar, and what is your new captain? What is her name again?
Sherry Meisel.
She was in civilian attire. I did not recognize her over the big place, and I was, she stood up, and and I'm turning around because I'm talking, and I'm like, can I help you? And she said, oh, you don't remember me. So you have a good undercover.
Just for you, James.
So anyway, it was nice to see them out celebrating part of the big annual event stuff. So the leadership of EPD is out there. They're very visible, and they do communicate. So I think that's a part of community police relationship, especially when you have the leadership out there talking to people, showing up at events and stuff, and I think it sets a positive tone for the community. So I encourage you to keep going, and well received. Thank you.
Can we just continue around this way? I just want to thank everyone. I think some of the topics that we have been covering over the last few months have just been great. The policies that we're talking about tonight, I think, are very important, not only for the public, but like the chief said, for the officers to know and to feel like that we're listening to them and trying to give them some guidance on how to handle things out there. So great work, everyone.
just had a thought about that ACLU app. It just needs one more feature. It's the one that suddenly starts the whole screen flashing red and yelling, "You're too close, you're too close, you're too close." I think I say this about every other month, what a pleasure it is to come to these meetings and work with people who, after a relatively brief discussion, can all put their hands in the air and say, yes, I agree with that. Because I sit on some other bodies that I'm not sure will ever have a unanimous vote. So we should give ourselves, if not a little pat on the back, at least a nod of acknowledgement that we work well together and we respect each other's opinions and we can get work done in a timely manner. Yay, us. Take it away, Jesse.
I'll pass. I don't have anything to add.
Same here.
I agree with the comments that have been made. You guys haven't been on the police commission as long as I have, so you don't really realize how much more work you get done when you're willing to listen to other people's opinions and respectfully state your opinion. Not that people have differing opinions. It seems like everybody feels comfortable expressing those, though. That's not always been the case, and when you're not willing to work together, you don't get work done. And I've seen iterations of the commission since I've been on that we got very little work done over the course of a year, which was really disheartening. So I'm really glad that we can be more effective in moving work forward, so thanks. And actually that goes, I should have mentioned, that's also because I appreciate the chief that you dedicating EPD personnel to us to help us with policies. We certainly couldn't do the work we do without the work that they're doing with us, so thank you for that.
We're here.
I want to thank the public again for coming, even with Carol's comment that I haven't over here.
We men like tease each other.
And the
Reasonable man, I said, isn't that an oxymoron?
That's when I turned around and stared at her. And thank you to everybody else. I know Leah was here, and Vicki. Thank you for coming. And
I'm Jim.
Oh, got too many Jims in this room. And definitely thank you for allowing your staff to come and help us out all the time. And I know that some of the stuff that we're covering wasn't on our work plan, but I'm glad that the leadership is allowing us to go through that because I think it's important. I think they are topics that are timely, and sometimes I think if you stick to a work plan and ignore everything else, sometimes you're not really hitting, things change over a period of time, and I think hitting, topics that are timely and sometimes more important than having to stick to that plan and just forging ahead with that and ignoring everything else. So I'm glad that we're going through that. Thank you.
And I utter that it is such a privilege to work each and every one. I know we have different opinions and different, I don't know their agendas, but I'll tell you what, I've really appreciated everybody's different point of view, and it has educated me and worked on my bias and prejudice. So like I said, it is such a privilege to work with here. And Pete, I've learned so much from you, and I think we were talking about it. You should listen like 31 or talk 31% of the time and listen the other. And thank you for, you are my guru of how to listen, and I thank you very much for that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for coming, and we're adjourned.
All right. A minute ahead of time.
Anybody on top of you?
With the tree huggers. You see where this is going.
You know that? Reviewing the video at a later time.
You got a lot of stuff.
See, I just would have put that here. Thanks, Jesse.
James.
Bob, Cameron, Bill. So I'm
Well, I know. And Claire.
Is that here? You went to count? Yeah.
She went on, she went and found my Gmail. So,
I've been really fortunate, either she has a count.
Yeah.
I'll give my number.
Thank you, sir.
thank you though. Yeah, and